Welcome to Calming Bedtime Historian Channel. Tonight we step quietly into a world where winter settles heavily across the frontier, where distant farmsteads stand alone beneath vast skies, and where a simple barn can mean the difference between comfort and misery. Have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to sleep beside livestock during a freezing night, wrapped in rough blankets while icy winds rattled wooden boards? Or why so many travellers and settlers considered a barn one of the safest places they could hope to find after sunset? The answer may surprise you. Life on the frontier was rarely romantic. It was practical, demanding, and often very cold. Yet within those humble structures, generations of people discovered clever ways to endure harsh weather and uncertain nights. Some of their habits seem strange today. Others still feel surprisingly familiar. So, before you settle into the story, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe. And while you're here, let me know your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights and allow yourself to follow a narrow trail through the fading light of a winter evening. The sun hangs low above the horizon as you approach a frontier farm. Its pale glow stretches across frozen fields covered in wind-blown snow. Long shadows reach across the landscape. The air feels sharp against your cheeks. Every breath produces a small cloud. The farm appears gradually. First you notice the fence line, then a cluster of buildings. A cabin stands near a well. A smokehouse leans slightly beside a shed. Beyond them rises the largest structure on the property, the barn. Its weathered boards carry the marks of many seasons. Snow clings to the roof. Thin ribbons of smoke drift from the farmhouse chimney nearby. You've been travelling for most of the day. Your boots feel stiff. Your fingers feel colder than you would prefer. The sight of shelter brings immediate relief. On the 19th century frontier, especially across parts of North America, barns served purposes far beyond storing animals and hay. Travellers sometimes slept inside them when cabins lacked space. Farm workers occasionally bedded down there during busy seasons. In emergencies, they could become temporary refuges from storms. That practical reality was well known. You walk closer. The crunch of snow beneath your boots breaks the evening silence. Somewhere beyond the fence, a horse snorts softly. The sound drifts through the cold air. A dog barks once, then grows quiet. The sky deepens toward blue. Night is approaching quickly. Winter daylight never seems eager to linger. As you reach the barn doors, you notice their size. They tower above you. Built wide enough for wagons loaded with hay. The wood smells faintly of age, sap, and weather. You pull one door open. The hinges complain immediately. A long creaking groan echoes through the structure. Warmth does not greet you. Not exactly. Barns were rarely warm by modern standards. Most contained plenty of drafts and little insulation. Yet compared with sleeping outdoors beneath open skies, the difference felt remarkable. You step inside, the atmosphere changes, the wind weakens, the air feels calmer. A mixture of scents fills your senses: dry hay, dust, leather, animal feed, earth. The smell is strong but not unpleasant. It speaks of work, survival, and routine. Your eyes slowly adjust. Golden stacks of hay rise toward the rafters. Wooden beams cross overhead. Lantern light flickers from somewhere deeper inside the building. You hear movement. A horse shifts its weight. A chain rattles softly. Hooves scrape against packed dirt. Every sound seems amplified within the dim interior. The frontier often required people to become comfortable with such surroundings. Many farms operated with limited resources. Construction materials were valuable. Labour demanded time. Creating separate heated sleeping quarters for every circumstance simply was not practical. People adapted. They always did. You move farther inside. The floor beneath your boots feels firm. Nearby, several cows stand quietly chewing their feed. Their slow movements create gentle rustling sounds. Clouds of warm breath drift from their nostrils. Those clouds catch the lantern light. For a moment they resemble tiny patches of fog. One curious detail surprises many modern visitors. Large animals generated considerable heat. A barn filled with livestock could remain noticeably warmer than the outdoors. Not comfortable, not cozy, but warmer. That difference battered, especially during severe weather. You set down your small pack and look around. The day has left you tired. Your shoulders ache. Your legs feel heavy, yet there is still work to do before rest becomes possible. Finding shelter was only the beginning. A strange stillness settles over the building. Not complete silence, never silence. Barns possess their own rhythm. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. Animals shift positions. Hay settles gradually. Tiny noises emerge from dark corners and vanish again. The structure almost seems alive. You listen carefully. Outside, the wind continues moving across the frozen fields. Its distant whistle reaches the barn walls before fading away. Inside, another world exists. A slower world, a quieter one. Many settlers described winter evenings as periods of reflection. Once daylight disappeared, outdoor tasks became difficult. Darkness encouraged storytelling, planning, and observation. You begin noticing details. A harness hangs neatly from a peg. Tools rest against one wall. Bundles of straw fill empty spaces between support posts. Nothing appears decorative. Everything has a purpose. Frontier life rewarded usefulness. Objects earned their place through necessity. A fascinating historical detail involves barn construction itself. Builders often relied on local timber and traditional joinery techniques. In some regions, massive wooden frames were assembled without large quantities of metal nails. Skilled craftsmen created surprisingly durable structures using carefully fitted wooden joints. Many survived decades, some survived generations. Of course, not every frontier barn looked identical. Historians continue discussing how regional influences shaped barn designs across expanding settlements. Climate, available materials, cultural traditions, and economic conditions all played important roles. The exact balance varied. As twilight fades completely, lantern light becomes more important. Shadows stretch between the haystacks. The corners grow darker. You find yourself glancing toward those shadows now and then. Human imagination has always worked hardest after sunset, even in a barn, especially in a barn. There was also a curious belief found in some rural communities. Certain farmers claimed animals behaved differently before severe storms. Horses reportedly grew restless. Cattle sometimes gathered unusually close together. Whether those observations reflected genuine environmental awareness or simple folklore remains uncertain. People watched carefully nonetheless. Experience encouraged attention. You walk toward a promising corner near a stack of hay. The location seems sheltered from drafts. Nearby animals provide a sense of company. The floor appears reasonably dry. For tonight, this may become your resting place. You pause for a final look around. The barn feels less intimidating now, less strange. Outside waits a frozen frontier night. Inside waits shelter, simple shelter. Yet on a winter evening like this, simple shelter can feel almost luxurious. The darkness deepens beyond the walls. The animals settle gradually, and as the last traces of daylight disappear from the cracks between the boards, your long night in the frontier barn is only beginning. You remain standing beside your chosen haystack while darkness settles more firmly outside the barn. The last traces of evening have disappeared. Only lantern light remains. Its soft glow reaches across the interior, illuminating some corners while leaving others wrapped in shadow. The animals appear calmer now. A horse lowers its head toward a pile of hay. One cow exhales slowly, filling the cool air with a cloud of steam. The night has officially begun, yet you are not ready to sleep, not even close. The frontier taught people an important lesson. Finding shelter was one task. Finding the right place within that shelter was another entirely. A poor sleeping location could lead to a miserable night. A good one might mean genuine rest. You pick up your pack and begin studying the barn more carefully. The first thing you notice is the floor. Much of it consists of packed earth covered with scattered straw. Some sections appear dry and comfortable enough. Others reveal damp patches where melted snow or animal traffic have left unpleasant surprises. You quickly decide that damp ground is your enemy. Cold already has enough allies. You move slowly between stacks of hay. The scent grows stronger here. Dry grass carries an earthy sweetness. Dust lingers faintly in the air. Every movement releases tiny particles that drift through the lantern glow like golden mist. You pause beside one wall. At first, the location seems ideal. Then you feel a thin stream of cold air brushing your sleeve, a draft. You look closely. Tiny gaps separate several boards. Wind slips through them with surprising determination. The opening may seem insignificant during daylight, but after several hours of winter darkness, that constant trickle of cold could become deeply uncomfortable. You continue searching. Patience matters. The best sleeping places rarely announce themselves immediately. Many frontier travelers understood this from experience. Wagon migrants, farm laborers, trappers, and teamsters often develop practical instincts about shelter. They learn to observe airflow, moisture, and proximity to animals before settling down. Those habits could make a considerable difference. You reach the center portion of the barn. The temperature feels slightly different here. Warmer somehow. Not warm enough to remove a coat, just noticeably less harsh. The reason becomes obvious. Several horses occupy nearby stalls. Their bodies produce heat steadily throughout the night. That warmth spreads gradually into the surrounding air. It does not transform the barn into a cozy room. Nothing quite so magical occurs. Still, every small advantage matters, especially in winter. A commonly accepted historical fact is that livestock represented immense economic value on frontier farms. Farmers protected animals not only because they cared for them, but because survival often depended upon them. Horses pulled equipment, cows provided milk, oxen moved heavy loads. Losing animals during harsh winters could threaten an entire household's future as a result. Barns often received more attention than outsiders might expect. You watch one horse flick its ears. The animal regards you briefly, then returns to its hay. Its calm behavior feels strangely reassuring. Large animals create a sense of companionship during long nights. Even travelers unfamiliar with farm life sometimes reported feeling safer near livestock than alone in open wilderness. Perhaps there is comfort in hearing another living creature breathe. You continue exploring. A ladder leads upward toward a loft. Curiosity wins. You climb carefully. Each step creaks beneath your weight. The loft opens into a broad space filled with hay. Here the smells intensify. Dry grass surrounds you on every side. Dust hangs in the still air. For a moment, the location seems perfect. Soft hay, relative privacy, a pleasant view across the barn interior. Then you notice another problem. Heat rises, but so does cold air entering through roof gaps. You can actually see tiny points of starlight through certain cracks between boards. The sight appears beautiful from a distance, less appealing when you imagine freezing drafts reaching your blanket at midnight. You reconsider. Frontier sleeping arrangements often involved compromise rather than perfection. The goal was not luxury. The goal was managing discomfort wisely. You descend once more. Below, the barn feels steadier, more sheltered. A faint breeze rattles the exterior walls. The sound reminds you of conditions beyond this refuge. Outside, temperatures continue falling. Inside, life continues. You move toward a corner protected by stacked hay bales and sturdy beams. The area sits near enough to the animals to benefit from their warmth, yet far enough to avoid constant disturbance. That balance feels important. No one wants a horse stepping directly beside their bedding during the night, at least not intentionally. You kneel and inspect the ground. Dry, level, reasonably clean, proper weighing. You begin arranging loose straw into a thicker layer. The work feels surprisingly satisfying. A simple bed starts taking shape. Not elegant, not impressive, functional. That was usually enough. Historians examining frontier diaries occasionally encounter descriptions of improvised bedding made from straw, hay, blankets, buffalo robes, animal skins, robes, or whatever materials happened to be available. Comfort depended heavily upon circumstance and season. Resourcefulness mattered more than possessions as you spread the straw. Another interesting detail comes to mind. Some rural communities believe particular sleeping locations inside barns brought good fortune. Certain families preferred resting near specific animals. Others avoided corners associated with strange stories or local legends. Whether such beliefs held any truth remains doubtful. Yet they persisted. People everywhere enjoy assigning personality to places. A distant thump interrupts your thoughts. You glance across the barn, one cow has shifted position. Nothing alarming, just another reminder that your roommates tonight weigh several £100s each. The realization feels mildly amusing. You finish arranging the bedding area, then sit down. The straw compresses beneath your weight. Not bad, certainly better than frozen ground. You stretch your legs and listen. The sounds have changed since sunset. Activity has faded. The animals move less frequently now. Occasional sounds break the quiet. Hooves scrape softly now and then. Wooden beams emit gentle pops as temperatures continue changing. The barn settles into itself. You begin noticing rhythms. Every structure possesses them. Particular sequence of noises repeats from the horse stalls. Wind touches the western wall more often than the eastern side. Somewhere overhead, loose straw shifts faintly among the rafters. Nothing feels threatening, merely unfamiliar. Scholars remain divided on how comfortable frontier sleeping arrangements actually were. Some accounts emphasize hardship and exhaustion. Others suggest experienced settlers adapted remarkably well, finding rest wherever necessity demanded. The reality likely varied enormously. Age, weather, health, and available resources all influence the experience. You lean back against the haystack. Its surface feels surprisingly pleasant, firm enough for support, soft enough to cushion. The smell of dry grass surrounds you completely now. It is becoming familiar. Comfort often begins with familiarity. Outside, winter continues its slow advance across the fields. Inside, you have found your place. Not the warmest location imaginable, not the finest bed ever constructed, simply the best option available, and on the frontier. That distinction carried tremendous importance. The lantern light flickers gently. The animals settle further. The corner you have chosen begins feeling less like borrowed shelter, and more like home for the night. Soon sleep will become the next challenge. For now, though, you rest quietly against the hay, listening to the living heartbeat of the barn as darkness deepens around you. You settle more comfortably against the haystack and allow your attention to drift toward the animals around you. The barn feels quieter now, not silent, never silent. A horse shifts in its stall. A cow exhales through wide nostrils somewhere overhead. A pigeon rustles among the rafters before becoming still once again. The sounds blend together. Gradually they form a steady background rhythm. You begin to understand why so many frontier travellers preferred a barn to an empty shed. The difference was not merely shelter from the wind, it was life. Living creatures occupied this space that mattered more than you might expect. The air remains cool against your skin, yet it no longer feels quite as sharp as the frozen evening outside. The reason stands all around you. Animals are warm, remarkably warm. A mature horse produces a surprising amount of body heat. Cattle do the same, even during bitter weather. Dozens of breathing creatures can subtly alter the atmosphere inside a building. You notice it now. Not warmth in the modern sense, no one is lounging comfortably in shirt sleeves. Rather, the cold feels restrained, softened around the edges. The difference resembles stepping from a frozen field into a chilly room. Neither environment is truly warm, yet one clearly offers an advantage. Frontier families understood this instinctively. Many farm buildings were designed with practical considerations in mind. Livestock required protection from winter conditions. Humans benefited from that same protection whenever circumstances demanded it. The arrangement was efficient. Efficiency often guided frontier life. You watch one horse lower its head toward fresh hay. The animal chews slowly. The sound seems surprisingly loud in the stillness. Crunch, pause, crunch again. There is something oddly relaxing about it. You find yourself listening. Soon another horse joins in, then a cow. The barn becomes filled with gentle chewing sounds. Not exactly the lullaby imagined by city dwellers. Yet after a long day, the rhythm carries a certain charm. You pull your coat tighter and glance toward the large doors. Tiny cracks reveal darkness beyond. Winter waits outside patiently. The wind brushes against the walls and produces a low whispering sound. The sturdy structure absorbs most of the force. You're grateful for that. One widely accepted historical fact is that livestock represented a family's wealth in many frontier communities. Animals supplied transportation, labour, milk, meat, hides, and countless other necessities. Protecting them during severe winters became a top priority. Barns therefore occupied a central place in daily life. People depended upon them. As the evening deepens, you begin noticing small differences between the animals themselves. Some remain active, others appear ready for sleep. A horse flicks its tail, another stamps a hoof. Several cows stand quietly, looking almost contemplative. You wonder whether they appreciate the shelter as much as you do. Perhaps not, yet they seem content enough. Their calm behaviour influences your own mood. Humans often take emotional cues from animals. A peaceful herd suggests safety. A restless one encourages caution. Tonight, calm prevails. The lantern flame flickers gently nearby. Its light catches drifting dust particles. Tiny specks float through the air like golden snowflakes. The sight feels strangely beautiful. Simple beauty, the kind often overlooked. A curious frontier tidbit concerns travellers who occasionally judged a farm's prosperity by the condition of its livestock. Healthy animals suggested capable management. Thin or neglected creatures hinted at difficult circumstances. Such observations were hardly perfect measurements, but they influenced impressions nonetheless. People noticed these things, especially when survival depended on practical knowledge. You lean back and listen again. Breathing, chewing, occasional movement. The sounds continue. The atmosphere grows increasingly peaceful. Then another scent reaches you. Warm animal fur. It mingles with the aroma of hay and wood. The combination creates a fragrance difficult to describe. Modern visitors might find it overwhelming at first. Those accustomed to farm life often regarded it as completely ordinary. Context changes everything. The smell of a barn could mean work or security, or simply home. For you tonight, it means shelter. You shift position slightly and discover that your chosen corner feels even better than before. The haystack blocks some of the cooler air drifting through the building. Nearby livestock contributes subtle warmth. The ground remains dry beneath your bedding, a fortunate combination. Good decisions often reveal their value slowly. You watch the lantern shadows moving across the beams overhead. The shapes stretch and contract as the flame dances within its glass enclosure. For a moment, the rafters resemble the framework of a ship, a wooden vessel anchored in a sea of darkness. The comparison feels appropriate. After all, the barn protects its occupants from the stormy ocean of winter beyond its walls. Researchers still disagree about how much temperature difference livestock actually created. inside various barn designs. Conditions varied enormously according to building size, ventilation, animal numbers, and weather severity. Some accounts describe noticeable improvements. Others suggest the effects were modest. The exact answer remains difficult to measure. What seems clear is that people valued the advantage, otherwise they would not have sought it so often. Another horse snorts. The sound startles you briefly, then you laugh quietly. Frontier nights often contained moments like this. Fatigue, heightened awareness. Familiar noises could suddenly seem dramatic. A shifting animal might sound like an approaching stranger. Imagination enjoys darkness, especially when accompanied by exhaustion. You glance across the barn again. Everything remains peaceful. A few lantern reflections gleam in animal eyes. The effect appears mysterious from a distance. Small points of light hover within the shadows, watching, blinking, then disappearing. You understand why rural folklore developed so naturally. Long nights encouraged storytelling. Strange sights inspired creative explanations. A perfectly ordinary horse could appear almost magical beneath uncertain lighting. Human minds are talented at filling gaps. The frontier provided many gaps. The temperature continues falling outside, inside. However, the living warmth of the barn persists. You feel it most clearly when comparing the air near the doors with the air near the stalls. The difference is subtle, yet undeniable. You imagine travellers centuries ago making similar observations. Some probably arrived soaked from snow. Others likely carried frozen gear or aching muscles after difficult journeys. Many must have felt relief upon entering spaces like this, not luxury. Relief. There is an important distinction. You close your eyes briefly. The sounds remain steady, predictable, comforting. A horse breathes, a cow shifts, straw rustles softly. The entire structure seems to settle deeper into the night. You find yourself appreciating the company around you. These animals ask nothing, they offer no conversation. Yet their presence transforms the experience completely. An empty barn would feel colder, lonelier, perhaps even unsettling. This barn feels different, alive. As the evening advances, you become less aware of individual sounds and more aware of the collective atmosphere they create. The warmth, the breathing, the scent of hay, and the steady presence of livestock blend into a single sensation. Security, not perfect security. Frontier life rarely offered perfection, but enough to rest, enough to face the night, enough to remind you why generations of travellers, settlers, and farm workers regarded a humble barn filled with animals as one of winter's greatest gifts. The lantern burns quietly. The horses remain calm. The cattle continue their slow routines, and nestled beside your haystack, surrounded by the hidden warmth of the living creatures, you settle deeper into the long frontier night. You sit quietly beside your carefully chosen sleeping place and begin considering the next challenge of the evening. Finding a corner was important. Making it comfortable is something else entirely. The barn remains calm around you. Horses continue their slow chewing. Cattle shift occasionally within their stalls. The lantern casts gentle pools of amber light across the packed earth floor. Outside, the cold strengthens. You can feel it indirectly. The wind brushes against the walls more frequently now. Sometimes it slips through tiny cracks and produces faint whistles that drift across the interior before fading away. The night is settling in for a long stay. You glance down at the layer of straw beneath you. At first, it appears rather unimpressive. A pile of dried plants hardly resembles a mattress. Yet generations of frontier settlers would likely disagree with that judgment. To them, straw represented opportunity. It created insulation, it softened hard ground. Most importantly, it helped separate sleeping bodies from surfaces eager to steal precious warmth. That separation mattered enormously. Cold earth is relentless. You begin pulling additional straw from a nearby pile. The stalks rustle softly as you work. Their dry texture scratches lightly against your gloves. A faint grassy scent rises into the air. You spread the material carefully, not too thin, not excessively thick. Experience taught many frontier people that balance often worked best. A modest layer compressed into a reasonably comfortable cushion. Too little left sleepers exposed. Too much could become awkward and unstable. The process feels surprisingly methodical, almost peaceful. One well-documented reality of rural life was the constant need for improvisation. Store-bought comforts remain scarce or expensive in many frontier regions. Families learn to create solutions from whatever resources happen to be available. Necessity encouraged creativity. Tonight, your bedding reflects that tradition. You continue shaping the straw. The pile slowly transforms into something resembling a bed. Not a luxurious bed, not the sort advertised in modern catalogues with extravagant promises about perfect sleep, just practical. Frontier people appreciated practical things. The haystack beside you provides additional support. You press against it briefly and feel its firmness. Thousands of dried stems packed together create a surprisingly solid barrier. Useful for blocking drafts, useful for leaning against, useful for sleep. You remove a blanket from your pack. Its fabric feels rough beneath your fingers. Years of use have softened some sections while leaving others stubbornly coarse. Still, the blanket represents comfort. Any blanket does, especially during winter. You shake it gently. Dust particles drift through the lantern light. For several moments they resemble tiny floating stars. The sight feels oddly beautiful. Simple moments often do. Across the barn a horse snorts loudly. The sudden sound breaks the stillness. Then everything returns to normal. You smile despite yourself. The animals seem determined to remind you that this building belongs to them first. You are merely a guest. A curious custom occasionally appeared in frontier accounts involving the use of extra clothing as bedding material. Travellers sometimes placed coats beneath themselves rather than over themselves. The reasoning was straightforward. Compressing insulation beneath the body could reduce heat loss from the ground. The technique was not perfect, but people used whatever advantages they could find. You consider your own coat briefly, then decide it should remain exactly where it is. The evening is cold enough already, as your bedding takes shape. You notice how the atmosphere inside the barn continues changing. The earlier activity has faded almost completely. Movements become less frequent. Sounds emerge farther apart. A sense of quiet ownership settles over the night. The lantern flame flickers gently. The shadows deepen. The smell of hay grows increasingly familiar when first encountered. Such an environment might feel strange. After several hours, it begins feeling normal. Human beings adapt quickly when circumstances require it. Perhaps that ability explains so much of frontier history. You spread a second blanket. This one will serve as a covering later. For now, it rests folded beside your makeshift bed. The arrangement looks humble, yet satisfying. You created it yourself. There is comfort in that. Surviving farm journals frequently mention bedding materials because sleep represented an important practical concern. Exhausted people worked less efficiently. Cold people became vulnerable to illness. Good rest could influence the success of an entire day. Sleep was not a luxury. It was a necessity. The frontier understood that clearly. You settle onto the straw and test the results. The surface compresses beneath your weight. Not bad. A few stalks poke through awkwardly. You remove them and adjust the bedding slightly. The improvement feels immediate. Progress. Small progress still counts. The wind strengthens outside. For several moments it pushes firmly against the barn walls. Wooden boards creak in response, somewhere near the roof. A loose piece of timber rattles softly. Then the gust passes. The building remains steady. Strong, reliable. You feel grateful for that. Researchers continue examining how much comfort varied between different frontier regions. Wealthier farm families sometimes possessed better blankets and more substantial resources. Others relied heavily on whatever could be produced locally. Conditions differed enormously across settlements. No single experience defined frontier life, yet adaptation remained a common theme. You pull the blanket across your lap and glance toward the rafters overhead. Darkness fills most of the upper reaches of the barn now. The lantern illuminates only fragments of beams and supports. The rest disappears into shadow. A few quiet sounds drift downward from above, perhaps pigeons, perhaps settling hay. Nothing concerning, just reminders that the barn contains many layers. An unusual belief recorded in certain farming communities suggested that sleeping near freshly stored hay encouraged vivid dreams. Some people insisted the scent influenced sleep. Others dismissed the idea entirely. Whether there was any truth behind the claim remains uncertain. Still, it is easy to imagine how such stories developed. The smell surrounds you completely, earthy, dry, comforting. You inhale deeply. The scent now feels connected to shelter itself. The connection grows stronger with each passing minute. A horse stamps one hoof, another answers with a snort. Then silence returns. The animals seem increasingly ready for rest. You feel much the same. The bedding beneath you has reached its final form. Straw provides insulation. Blankets offer protection. The nearby haystack blocks drafts from one direction. No arrangement could eliminate the cold entirely. That was never the goal. The goal was reducing hardship, making winter manageable, creating enough comfort to welcome sleep. You stretch out fully for the first time. The straw rustles beneath you. The sound seems loud at first. Then it fades into the background. Soon it becomes part of the barn's nightly rhythm. You close your eyes briefly. The smell of hay lingers. The cool air brushes your face. Animal breaths drift softly through the darkness. When you open your eyes again, the lantern still glows steadily nearby. The night remains young. Much lies ahead before morning, yet your place within the barn now feels established. The rough bed is ready. The blankets wait nearby. The sounds of livestock surround you like a quiet chorus, and nestled among straw, wood, and winter shadows, you begin preparing yourself for the long hours that still separate you from dawn. You settle deeper into your makeshift bed and watch as the barn gradually surrenders to darkness. The transformation happens slowly, almost politely. The lantern still burns nearby, but its influence seems smaller than before. Shadows claim more territory with each passing minute. Corners disappear, beams fade into obscurity. The upper reaches of the barn become a world of silhouettes and uncertainty. Night has taken command. The animals recognize it. Their movements grow less frequent. Their sounds become softer. A horse occasionally shifts its weight. A cow exhales in a long, steady breath. Beyond that, stillness begins spreading through the structure. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders. The rough fabric traps a small pocket of warmth. Not much, enough. The scent of hay remains strong around you. It mixes with traces of leather, wood, and livestock. Together they create the unmistakable atmosphere of a working frontier barn. At first, the smell seemed unusual. Now it feels reassuring. Familiarity arrives quickly. You glance toward the massive doors. Only darkness waits beyond them. The frozen fields have vanished from sight. The fences, the farmhouse, and the distant tree line all belong to another world now. Only the barn remains visible, a small island of shelter, surrounded by winter. Many surviving accounts from frontier settlements describe how dramatically darkness altered daily life. Without electric lighting, the arrival of night transformed ordinary spaces into unfamiliar landscapes. Shapes became uncertain. Distances felt greater. Sounds carried more significance. You experience that sensation now. The barn has not changed physically, yet it feels different. The darkness reshapes perception. A loose rope hanging from a beam suddenly resembles a figure standing motionless. A stack of tools appears stranger than it did an hour ago. Even the familiar hay bales seem to possess new personalities beneath shifting shadows. Then the lantern flickers, the illusion disappears, your imagination settles again. For the moment, a brief scratching sound emerges from somewhere across the barn. You immediately look up, nothing moves. The sound comes again, soft, quick, then silence. Perhaps a mouse, perhaps settling straw, perhaps one of the countless harmless noises that become fascinating after sunset. The uncertainty lingers briefly before fading away. Night encourages curiosity. You listen more carefully. The barn offers plenty to hear. Wooden beams emit occasional pops as temperatures continue dropping. A chain sways lightly against a stall wall somewhere overhead. Tiny claws scamper across a beam before vanishing into darkness. Life continues even while resting. The realization feels comforting. One interesting detail found in some rural memoirs concerns how quickly newcomers noticed nighttime barn sounds. Farm families often ignored them completely. Visitors, however, remained alert to every creak and rustle. Familiarity transformed potential worries into background noise. Experience teaches selective attention. You're still learning. The lantern flame dances again. Its glow stretches across the floor and briefly illuminates floating dust particles. They drift lazily through the air before disappearing into shadow. The scene feels peaceful, almost dreamlike. Then a horse sneezes, loudly. The sudden explosion of sound echoes through the building. For an instant, your heart decides something dramatic has occurred. Nothing dramatic has occurred. The horse appears perfectly satisfied with its contribution to the evening. You relax once more. Frontier nights likely contained countless moments like this. People resting in unfamiliar places often startled themselves over entirely ordinary events. Human nerves are creative companions, especially after dark. The wind rises outside. You hear it approaching before it reaches the barn. The sound moves across the landscape like an invisible wave, and skitters along frozen ground. Bare branches whisper in the distance. Then the gust arrives. The walls creak softly. The roof murmurs. The structure absorbs the pressure and remains steady. You feel grateful for every board and beam surrounding you. Evidence from the period shows that sturdy barns represented major investments of labour. Raising one required planning, materials, and cooperation. Communities sometimes gathered to assist with construction projects because the finished building benefited both people and animals. The effort was considerable, so was the reward. You lie back and observe the ceiling, or rather, the portion of it still visible. Most has disappeared into darkness, only fragments remain illuminated. The effect creates endless opportunities for imagination. Certain beams resemble twisting branches, others look like bridges suspended above a hidden landscape. You blink, the shapes become ordinary wood again. A curious tradition in some farming regions held that barns possessed distinct personalities. Families spoke of them almost as living companions. Certain buildings were considered cheerful, others were described as stubborn, dependable, or temperamental. The descriptions sound charming today, yet it is easy to understand their origins. People spent enormous portions of their lives around these structures. Relationships formed naturally. The night deepens, the temperature falls further. You can feel the change against your face. The exposed skin near your nose and cheeks notices every degree. Fortunately, the blanket continues holding warmth around the rest of your body. Comfort improves gradually. Exhaustion helps. You adjust your position slightly, the straw rustles beneath you, then settles. Nearby, a horse breathes in a slow rhythm. You begin unconsciously matching that rhythm. Inhale, exhale, pause. The pattern feels calming. Perhaps that is another reason people appreciated sleeping near animals. Their steady presence encourages a slower pace. They do not rush. They do not worry about tomorrow's schedule. They simply exist. The darkness around you grows richer and softer. Harsh edges disappear. Shadows blend together. The barn becomes a collection of sounds, scents, and sensations rather than clearly defined objects. Researchers have offered different interpretations regarding how isolated frontier families experienced long winter nights. Some emphasize loneliness. Others highlight community bonds and routine. Both perspectives likely contain truth depending on circumstance. Experiences varied widely. Your own night feels neither lonely nor crowded. The animals provide company. The barn provides shelter. The darkness provides mystery. That combination seems sufficient. Another small sound drifts from the rafters. A flutter. Then stillness. Perhaps a bird shifting position while sleeping. Perhaps something else entirely. You decide not to investigate. Certain mysteries are harmless. The lantern burns lower now. Its flame has become smaller and steadier. Shadows no longer leap across the walls. Instead, they rest quietly in place. The entire building feels drowsy. Even the wind seems less energetic than before. You pull the blanket a little higher. The haystack supports your shoulders. The scent of dried grass fills each breath. The rough boards, the livestock, the lantern light, and the gathering darkness all blend into a single experience. This is what the frontier offered. Not luxury, not convenience, something simpler. Shelter earned through effort, comfort discovered through adaptation, a place to rest while winter prowls beyond the walls. The barn creaks softly one final time. A horse exhales. The lantern flickers. And wrapped within a world of shadows, sounds, and familiar smells, you settle deeper into the frozen night as sleep begins its slow approach. The darkness settles comfortably around you, and for a while it seems as though sleep might arrive early. Then your stomach reminds you otherwise. A quiet emptiness appears, not painful, not urgent, just persistent. The kind of hunger that follows a long day spent outdoors in cold weather. You open your eyes. The lantern still glows nearby, its flame has shrunk slightly, yet it continues casting a warm amber circle across the straw-covered floor. The horses remain calm. The cattle stand quietly in their stalls. The barn seems half asleep. You are not, at least not yet. The frontier taught an important lesson about winter survival. Rest mattered. Shelter mattered. Warm clothing mattered. But food remained equally important. A well-fed body had a better chance of producing heat through the long hours of darkness. Cold weather demanded fuel. People understood this through experience. You sit up slowly. The blanket slips from your shoulders. Cool air immediately reaches your neck and face. The difference is noticeable enough to encourage efficiency. No lingering, no unnecessary delay. You reach for your pack. The leather feels cold beneath your fingers. Opening it releases the faint scent of stored provisions. Nothing fancy waits inside. Frontier travelers rarely carried elaborate meals for nighttime comfort. Practicality usually determined the menu. You remove a small portion of food and settle back against the haystack. The sounds of the barn continue around you. A horse shifts, straw rustles, a distant beam creaks softly overhead. The atmosphere remains peaceful as you prepare to eat. You think about the countless people who spent winter nights in similar circumstances. Farmers, hired hands, wagon travellers, trappers, surveyors, and migrants all face the same challenge. How do you stay warm until morning? The answer often began with supper. Period journals frequently mentioned simple evening meals consisting of bread, salt pork, dried meat, beans, potatoes, cornmeal, or whatever ingredients happened to be available locally. Luxury rarely appeared on the menu. Calories mattered more than elegance. The food in your hands reflects that reality. Simple, reliable, filling, You take the first bite. The taste is plain but satisfying. After a long day, the body becomes less concerned with culinary excitement and more interested in useful energy. Hunger improves appreciation remarkably. Even ordinary food feels special, especially at night. You chew slowly. Nearby, one of the horses continues doing exactly the same thing with its own meal. The comparison makes you smile. The horse appears entirely focused on the task. Perhaps it has the right idea. Outside, the wind rises again. Its distant voice reaches the barn walls and lingers briefly before moving on. You imagine snow drifting across frozen fields beneath the dark sky. The temperature is likely dropping further now, inside. However, your meal provides a growing sense of comfort. Not warmth exactly, potential warmth, energy waiting to be converted. One practical reality of frontier living was that heavy physical labour often required surprisingly large amounts of food. Chopping wood, caring for livestock, hauling supplies, and travelling through winter conditions consumed tremendous energy. People who worked hard needed fuel to match, their lives demanded it. You take another bite. The scent of hay mingles with the smell of your provisions. Together they create an atmosphere that feels deeply connected to survival. Nothing here exists for decoration. Everything serves a purpose. Food, shelter, warmth, rest. The essentials reveal themselves clearly in places like this. A lesser-known habit occasionally mentioned in rural accounts involved eating a small portion of food before sleeping specifically to help endure cold nights. Whether the effect was dramatic or merely psychological likely varied from person to person. Still, the practice appeared often enough to attract attention. People trusted what seemed to work. The lantern flickers gently. Its light reflects from metal hardware attached to nearby stalls. Tiny flashes appear and disappear as the flame moves within its glass enclosure. The sight feels strangely hypnotic. You continue eating, the meal remains uncomplicated, yet satisfaction grows steadily. Sometimes comfort arrives in modest forms. A dry sleeping place, a sturdy roof, a few bites of food, a calm night. The frontier encouraged appreciation for such things. Across the barn, a cow exhales deeply. The sound resembles a quiet sigh. For a moment, it almost seems as though the animal approves of your supper. You suspect this interpretation may reveal more about your imagination than the cow's actual opinion. Night has a way of encouraging unusual thoughts. You finish another bite and settle more comfortably against the hay. The rough stems press gently against your back. Their dry texture contrasts with the smooth blanket wrapped around your legs. Every sensation feels distinct in the quiet darkness. Your senses seem sharper somehow. Perhaps because there are fewer distractions. Researchers examining frontier diets continue discussing how regional differences influenced what people actually ate. Geography shaped available ingredients, climate affected preservation methods, cultural traditions influenced recipes and preferences. No single frontier menu existed. Experiences varied enormously. What remained consistent was the importance of nourishment. Winter offered little patience for neglect. You pause and listen. The barn has become quieter still. Long pauses now separate individual sounds. The horses seem increasingly relaxed. Even the wind appears less aggressive than earlier. The entire world feels slower, more deliberate. You finish the last portion of your meal. The final bite disappears. A pleasant heaviness settles into your stomach. Not excessive, just enough. The sensation brings immediate reassurance. A curious belief found in some rural communities suggested that certain foods encouraged warmer sleep than others. Families developed strong opinions regarding which meals best prepared a person for freezing weather. Some swore by hearty stews, others favoured cornmeal dishes or particular meat preparations. Such preferences often became traditions. Traditions rarely require scientific proof. You place the remaining supplies back into your pack. The task feels oddly ceremonial. The day is ending. The meal is finished. Soon only sleep remains. You glance once more across the dim interior. The barn appears different now than it did at sunset. Earlier it felt like a place of activity and movement. Now it resembles a quiet sanctuary suspended between darkness and dawn. The animals rest. The lantern glows softly. The smell of hay fills the air. Everything feels settled. You pull the blanket higher around your shoulders. A gentle warmth begins spreading through your body as digestion performs its ancient work. The meal may have been simple, but it has accomplished its purpose. That purpose was never luxury. It was endurance, comfort enough to continue, strength enough for tomorrow. The wind whispers beyond the walls. The horses breathe steadily. The lantern burns lower, and with a full stomach, a sheltered corner, and the reassuring presence of life around you, the frontier night feels a little less cold than before. Your meal is finished. The blankets are arranged. The animals have settled into their nighttime routines. For a few moments, everything feels wonderfully still. Then you become aware of the smells again, not because they suddenly appear. They have been present all along. Your attention simply returns to them. The frontier barn surrounds you with an entire landscape of scents. Some are obvious, others reveal themselves gradually. Together they form an invisible portrait of rural life during winter. You take a slow breath. Dry hay arrives first. It carries a sweet, earthy fragrance that lingers comfortably in the air. The scent reminds you of summer fields long buried beneath snow months ago. This hay stood beneath sunlight. It swayed in warm breezes and attracted insects. Now it waits inside the barn, stored for survival. The smell preserves a small memory of warmer seasons. You inhale again. This time another scent emerges. Wood. Old wood. The barn's beams have absorbed decades of weather, dust, and daily life. Their smell differs from freshly cut timber. It feels deeper somehow, more settled, almost historical. The aroma drifts through the darkness like a quiet reminder of passing years. You shift slightly within your bedding. The straw rustles beneath you. Nearby, a horse exhales. A new scent joins the mixture. Animal warmth. Difficult to describe precisely. Completely unmistakable. Farm families of the 19th century would have recognized it instantly. To them, it often signaled security. Healthy livestock meant food, transportation, labor, and economic stability. The smell of animals carried practical meaning, not merely sensory information. Many surviving farm journals mention livestock constantly. Animals occupied such an important role that they appeared throughout daily records. Weather reports, feeding schedules, illnesses, births, and sales all received careful attention. Life revolved around them. Tonight, they surround you. The air remains cool enough that every breath feels crisp, yet the barn retains a gentle softness compared with the frozen world outside. You can almost sense the difference through smell alone. The outside air would carry snow, ice, bare earth, wind. Inside, life has altered the atmosphere. You become aware of leather as well. Harnesses hang from pegs nearby. Saddles rest against walls. Straps and reins wait for tomorrow's work. Their scent drifts faintly through the darkness. It blends naturally with everything else. Nothing feels out of place. The barn smells exactly as a barn should. A horse shifts position. Hooves scrape gently against the floor. The movement stirs the air slightly and introduces another layer to the sensory landscape. Grain, feed, dust, dry straw. The mixture grows more complex, yet somehow more comforting. People adapt remarkably quickly. When you first entered the building, the collection of scents may have seemed overwhelming. Several hours later, your mind has organized them into something familiar. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to normalize their surroundings. That talent served frontier communities well. You close your eyes briefly, without taint sight. The smells become even more noticeable. The hay appears stronger, the wood more distinct, the faint traces of livestock easier to identify. The barn seems larger somehow, more alive, across many farming regions. Families spent so much time around these scents that they barely noticed them anymore. Visitors occasionally remarked upon strong odours that residents considered entirely ordinary. Perspective changes everything. One traveller might describe a barn as pungent. A farmer might describe it as home. You smile at the thought. Both observations could be true. The lantern burns quietly nearby. Its flame produces a subtle smell of heated metal and oil. The scent is faint but recognizable. It joins the rest without drawing attention to itself, like another voice in a choir. You listen to the steady breathing of the animals, then to the wind beyond the walls, then to your own breathing. All three rhythms overlap. For a few moments, the experience feels almost meditative. A forgotten rural belief found in scattered local stories suggested that certain scents could predict changing weather. Some farmers claimed they could smell approaching snowstorms. Others insisted barns developed a distinct atmosphere before severe cold arrived. Whether such observations reflected genuine environmental clues or simple intuition remains difficult to determine. Still, people trusted their senses. They had reason to. Life often depended on observation. A distant creak sounds from the rafters. You open your eyes again. Nothing unusual appears, only shadows, only beams, only darkness. The familiar ingredients of a frontier night. The smell of hay remains strongest of all. There is something reassuring about its constancy. It does not shift dramatically. It does not surprise you. It simply exists, steady, dependable, patient, much like the barn itself. You pull the blanket slightly higher. The fabric brushes your chin. Its rough texture contrasts with the softness of the hay nearby. Every sensation seems clearer during the quiet hours of night. Perhaps because there is less competition for attention. Perhaps because fatigue encourages reflection. Either way, the experience feels immersive. You are not merely observing the barn, you are living within it. Letters written by settlers sometimes reveal how strongly smell influenced memory. Years later, individuals could recall the scent of fresh hay, wood smoke, livestock, or damp earth with remarkable clarity. Certain smells remained connected to specific places and seasons. Memory often travels through the nose, more quickly than through words. You wonder whether the same thing might happen to you. Would the smell of dry hay someday bring this entire night rushing back the lantern? The horses, the winter wind, the blankets, the darkness. It seems possible. The barn grows quieter still. Long stretches pass without interruption. The animals appear comfortable. Their breathing remains steady. Their movements have become infrequent. The night is settling deeper. The hours ahead feel long, yet not unpleasant. The atmosphere surrounding you has become surprisingly welcoming. Not because it resembles modern comfort. It does not. It feels welcoming because it fulfills its purpose. The barn provides shelter. The hay provides insulation. The animals provide warmth and company. The scents provide familiarity. Everything contributes something. Nothing is wasted. You breathe deeply once more. Hay, wood, leather, dust, livestock, lantern weighing oil. The entire frontier world seems contained within those aromas. Outside, winter continues its silent march across the frozen fields. Inside, the air carries the story of work, survival, and ordinary life, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the sense of a living farm. You settle deeper into your bedding and allow the barn's invisible atmosphere to become part of the long night unfolding around you. The smells of the barn settle comfortably into the background as the night continues deepening around you. For a while, everything feels calm, predictable, almost gentle. Then the wind changes. At first, the difference is subtle. A slightly stronger whistle reaches the walls. The boards respond with a faint groan. Loose straw near the doorway stirs briefly before becoming still again. You open your eyes. The barn remains dark and peaceful. Yet something beyond its walls has become more active. Winter is stretching its muscles. You listen carefully. Another gust arrives. This one lasts longer. The sound rolls across the roof like distant surf breaking against a shoreline. Snow scrapes across the exterior boards. Tiny vibrations travel through the structure before fading away. The barn remains steady. Still, the weather is making its presence known. You pull your blanket closer and glance toward the large doors. Darkness fills every crack. Nothing can be seen beyond them, only heard. The frontier often required people to develop a close relationship with weather. Modern forecasts did not exist. Storm warnings rarely arrived in advance. Families learned to observe clouds, wind patterns, temperatures, and animal behavior with remarkable attention. Nature delivered the information directly. People simply had to notice it. Another gust strikes, the barn creaks softly. A horse raises its head, then lowers it again. Apparently the animal finds the situation unworthy of concern. You decide to follow its example. The wind continues, not violent, not yet, but persistent. Each new gust seems slightly stronger than the one before. The sound becomes a constant companion beyond the walls. You imagine the frozen fields outside, snowdrift shifting across open ground, fence posts collecting fresh white layers, bare branches swaying against the dark sky. The landscape is working hard tonight. Inside the barn, conditions remain entirely different. That contrast feels remarkable. The walls may be simple wooden boards, yet they create a boundary between two worlds. On one side lies exposure, on the other lies shelter. The difference is profound. Many farm accounts from northern frontier regions describe winter storms as regular visitors rather than unusual events. People expected them, prepared for them, adapted their routines around them. Ignoring weather was rarely an option. You hear a loose piece of timber rattle somewhere near the roof. The sound lasts only a moment, then silence returns. Well, not silence exactly. The wind has become too active for true silence. Its voice now accompanies everything. You settle deeper into your bedding and focus on the barn itself. The structure seems almost alive beneath the pressure. Beams absorb stress, boards flex slightly. Joints hold firm, nothing dramatic. Yet you gain a new appreciation for the craftsmanship surrounding you. Every piece matters. Every connection serves a purpose. A strong barn was more than a storage building. It was protection. A horse snorts nearby. Another shifts position. The livestock appear aware of the weather, though not especially troubled by it. Their calmness helps steady your own thoughts. Animals often possess a reassuring practicality. They respond to genuine problems. They rarely worry about hypothetical ones. Outside, a longer gust sweeps across the landscape. This time the sound resembles a low howl. The noise lingers around the corners of the barn before gradually fading into the distance. You listen carefully. The frontier night suddenly feels larger, vast, cold, endless. Yet the barn remains a small pocket of order within that immensity. Certain rural communities once believed that storms had personalities. Some were described as angry, others were considered lazy or stubborn. Families occasionally spoke about approaching weather almost as though discussing a difficult neighbour arriving for an unexpected visit. The language sounds charming today. Still, after hearing the wind circle a barn at midnight, you can understand the impulse. The sound feels strangely alive. You adjust the blanket again. Warmth remains trapped beneath it, though the air above feels cooler than before. The temperature inside the barn has likely fallen several degrees since sunset. Winter never stops working. Even sheltered spaces feel its influence. You notice your breath briefly when you exhale toward the lantern light. A faint cloud appears and disappears. The sight serves as a useful reminder. The barn protects you. It does not defeat the season. There is a difference. Old agricultural guides sometimes advise farmers to inspect barns carefully before severe weather arrived. Loose boards, damaged roofs, and weak doors could create serious problems during storms. Maintenance was not glamorous work, but it often determined how comfortably people and animals endured difficult nights. Preparation mattered, perhaps more than courage. The wind surges again, stronger now. Several horses lift their heads at once. One flicks its ears toward the wall, another pauses its chewing briefly before continuing. The reaction lasts only seconds. Soon the animals relax again. You find that encouraging. If they remain calm, perhaps you should as well. The lantern flame trembles slightly, not enough to threaten darkness, just enough to remind you that the outside world remains active. The smell of hay drifts around you, steady, familiar, comforting. It provides an unexpected contrast to the restless sounds beyond the walls. One represents stability, the other movement. Together they create a strange balance. You lie quietly and listen. Minutes pass. The storm, if it can be called a storm yet, continues building gradually. No dramatic transformation occurs. Instead, the weather advances in careful steps, a little more wind, a little more noise, a little more pressure against the structure. The progression feels deliberate. Records from different frontier settlements sometimes describe winter weather in remarkably different ways. One family's terrifying blizzard might be another family's ordinary Tuesday. Geography shaped expectations significantly. Experience shaped them even more. What feels alarming to one person often feels routine to another. You suspect the farmers who own this barn would consider tonight entirely manageable, perhaps even unremarkable. That thought brings comfort. A final powerful gust rolls across the fields and strikes the barn broadside. The walls creak, loose straw shifts. A horse snorts in mild annoyance. Then everything settles once more. The structure has passed another small test. The wind moves onward. You exhale slowly. The barn remains solid. The animals remain calm. The blankets remain warm. Outside, winter continues its endless conversation with the landscape. Inside, you remain protected from most of its arguments. The sounds of the wind blend gradually into the background. They become another part of the night's rhythm, joining the breathing horses, the rustling straw, and the occasional creak of aging timber. Wrapped in blankets and surrounded by shelter built through hard work and experience, you listen to the weather roaming beyond the walls and feel grateful for every sturdy board standing between you and the freezing dark. The wind continues roaming across the frozen countryside, but your attention gradually shifts back toward the sounds inside the barn. The weather has established its presence. Now another performance begins. You lie quietly beneath your blanket and listen. Really listen. Not the casual listening of daytime, not the distracted listening that accompanies busy work. This is nighttime listening. Patient, focused, the sort that turns an ordinary building into an entire world. A horse breathes deeply nearby. The sound fills the darkness. Slow inhale, slow exhale. A few moments later, another horse responds with a similar rhythm. Soon several overlapping patterns emerge from different corners of the barn. The effect feels almost musical. Not polished music, not organized music, something older, something natural. The barn has become an orchestra without a conductor. You settle deeper into the straw. The lantern continues burning, though its light now reaches only a limited portion of the building. Most of the interior exists beyond sight. Sounds carry the story instead. A hoof scrapes gently. Straw rustles. A wooden beam creaks. Then silence returns for several heartbeats, only to be interrupted by another breath, another shift, another tiny movement. Every noise seems meaningful. The longer you listen, the more details emerge. One horse breathes slightly louder than the others. A cow occasionally moves its jaw while resting. Somewhere near the rafters, a small creature scurries briefly across a beam before stopping completely. The barn never truly sleeps. It simply changes tempo. Diaries written by rural families often reveal how accustomed people became to animal sounds. What might seem unusual or distracting to outsiders gradually transformed into background comfort. Silence. In some cases, felt stranger than noise. Habit shapes perception. The observation feels increasingly true. A few hours ago, each sound demanded attention. Now they blend together into something reassuring. The horse breathing closest to your corner has become especially familiar. Without realizing it, you have begun expecting the rhythm. When it pauses briefly, you notice immediately. Then it exhales again. Everything feels normal. Your mind relaxes. The smell of hay remains present. The cool air brushes your cheeks. The blanket traps warmth around the rest of your body. Together, these sensations create a cocoon of quiet awareness. You're not asleep, not fully awake either. Somewhere in between, the best place for bedtime history. A soft clink echoes from the stalls, metal touching wood. You glance toward the sound. A horse has shifted slightly, causing part of its tack to move against the stall structure. The noise lasts only an instant. Then darkness reclaims the moment. You smile. Every small event feels larger at night. A little mystery survives inside even the most familiar places, across various frontier regions. Livestock were often housed according to practical concerns such as weather, available space, and local traditions. Some barns contained separate sections for different animals. Others relied upon more flexible arrangements depending on season and circumstance. No two farms operated exactly alike. Yet many shared the same nighttime soundtrack. You hear another sound, a gentle snort, then a flutter from the rafters, then nothing. The sequence feels almost convolutional. The barn seems to communicate in fragments, never quite enough to explain itself completely. A surprisingly common piece of rural folklore claimed that experienced farmers could identify individual animals simply by listening in darkness. A particular hoof step, distinctive snort, a unique breathing pattern. Whether such claims were always accurate remains uncertain, yet people who spent years around the same animals likely became remarkably observant. Familiarity creates expertise. The lantern flickers again, for a brief moment. Shadows shift across the ceiling beams. The movement resembles distant clouds drifting across a nighttime sky. Then the flame steadies. The illusion vanishes. You continue listening. The wind outside has become part of the background now. Its voice remains present, but less demanding. The sounds within the barn command greater attention. They feel closer, more immediate. A cow exhales heavily. The sound resembles a contented sigh after a long day. You wonder whether animals experience something comparable to satisfaction. The cow has food, shelter, relative warmth. Perhaps that is enough. Many humans would gladly accept the same arrangement tonight. The thought feels strangely amusing. You shift slightly beneath the blanket. The straw responds with a soft rustle. Immediately, one nearby horse flicks an ear toward your corner. Apparently you have joined the orchestra, a brief participant in the ongoing performance. The horse soon loses interest. You take no offence. Another long stretch of quiet follows. The barn settles, the animals rest. The lantern glows, everything slows. You begin noticing sounds beyond individual animals. Tiny settling noises emerge from the structure itself. Wood contracts as temperatures continue falling. Hay compresses under its own weight. Somewhere high above, a beam releases a gentle pop. The building contributes its own voice, an old voice, patient and measured, Accounts from frontier settlements occasionally describe nights when people could estimate weather conditions simply by listening to their buildings. Strong winds produced familiar patterns. Heavy snow altered acoustics. Certain noises signaled changing temperatures. Experience became a form of education. Every winter added new lessons. You imagine the farmers who own this barn recognizing tonight's sounds instantly. They would know which creaks are ordinary and which deserve attention. Knowledge like that develops slowly, year after year, season after season. A faint scratching sound emerges once more from somewhere near the wall. Mouse, perhaps, or another small resident of the barn. You decide not to investigate. The creature seems harmless enough, besides, it belongs here as much as anyone. The night continues advancing, minutes drift past with little urgency. The darkness feels deeper now. The lantern's shrinking flame suggests that many hours remain before dawn. Yet the passage of time feels gentle, unhurried. The barn has created its own rhythm, separate from socks and schedules. Breathing, rustling, creaking, pausing, repeating. You close your eyes. The sounds become clearer immediately, without sight competing for attention. The nighttime symphony expands. Every horse breath, every shifting hoof, every whisper of straw gains new detail. The experience feels surprisingly calming, not despite the noises, because of them. Complete silence can feel lonely. This barn offers something different. Evidence of life, evidence of shelter. Evidence that you are not alone in the darkness. The wind brushes the walls. A horse exhales. A beam creaks softly overhead. The orchestra continues performing, and wrapped in blankets beside your haystack, you listen as the humble sounds of a frontier barn merge into a slow, steady symphony carrying you ever closer towards sleep. The barn's quiet symphony continues around you. Breathing horses, occasional hoof steps, the soft settling of straw, the distant voice of wind beyond the walls. Together they create a rhythm that almost carries you towards sleep. Almost. Then a cold spot finds your foot. You open one eye immediately. The frontier night has many talents. One of its favourites involves discovering the smallest weakness in your bedding arrangement. Your foot, unfortunately, has become today's example. You shift beneath the blanket. The cold retreats slightly. For a moment, then it returns, persistent, determined, almost professional. You pull the blanket tighter and adjust the straw beneath your legs. The movement produces a dry rustling sound. Nearby, one horse briefly lifts its head, notices nothing important, and returns to resting. A sensible approach. You attempt the same strategy. The cold has other plans. Winter nights rarely allowed complete relaxation, even inside a barn. Maintaining comfort required occasional attention. Blankets shifted, drafts changed direction, body heat escaped through unexpected gaps. You quickly begin noticing these small battles, none of them dramatic, all of them important. You sit up slightly and inspect your sleeping arrangement. The lantern's fading glow reveals nothing unusual, yet when you hold your hand near the floor, the answer becomes obvious: cool air. A steady stream of it, not strong enough to be called a draft, strong enough to matter after several hours. You pull additional straw toward the problem area and create a thicker barrier beneath your blanket. The improvement is immediate. Small adjustments often produce surprisingly large rewards. People living through frontier winters learn that lesson repeatedly. The horse nearest your corner exhales heavily. A cloud of vapour drifts into the lantern light before disappearing. Watching it reminds you how cold the air remains despite the shelter surrounding you. The barn helps, the animals help, the blankets help. Winter simply refuses to surrender completely. You settle back again. This time the bedding feels better. The cold spot weakens. Victory, at least for now. Across the frontier, families devoted enormous effort to managing heat. Cabins leaked warmth. Clothing wore out. Firewood supplies fluctuated. Every household developed routines aimed at preserving comfort during long winters. Those routines rarely appeared heroic. They were practical. Practicality kept people alive. You pull your hands inside the blanket. Instant improvement. Your fingers begin warming almost immediately. The sensation feels wonderful. Few pleasures rival the return of warmth to cold hands. The experience remains satisfying no matter the century. A fresh gust brushes the outside wall. The sound reaches you as a low murmur, nothing alarming, just another reminder that the weather remains active. You listen for a moment, then return your attention to the interior. The barn seems increasingly peaceful compared with the world beyond it. The contrast grows stronger each hour. You notice another clever advantage of your location. The haystack behind you continues, blocking air movement from one side, without realizing it. You selected one of the more protected corners available. A fortunate choice, or perhaps a wise one. Either explanation feels acceptable. A farmer from the period would probably view such decisions as common sense rather than luck. Experience taught people where cold air tended to collect. They learned which corners remained drier. They learned how blankets behaved over long nights. Knowledge accumulated quietly, one winter at a time. You shift position again. The straw compresses slightly beneath your weight. A faint crackling sound follows, then stillness. Comfort improves further. The body gradually settles into its environment when given enough time. The process feels almost automatic. Your eyes drift toward the rafters. Darkness fills most of the space overhead. The lantern now illuminates only fragments of beams and supports. Everything else remains hidden. You find that comforting rather than unsettling. The unknown corners seem sleepy, not threatening, just distant. A story passed through some farming communities suggested that sleeping near livestock brought deeper rest because animals maintained a calming presence throughout the night. Whether the belief emerged from observation or simple affection is impossible to know, yet lying here, surrounded by steady breathing and gentle sounds, you understand why people might think so. The atmosphere encourages relaxation, even when cold feet attempt sabotage. Another adjustment, another blanket tug, another small victory. Frontier comfort often consisted of countless tiny victories added together. A dry place, a sheltered corner, enough food, enough warmth, enough rest, rarely perfection, usually enough. The lantern flickers. For a moment, light dances across the stall walls. Metal fittings glimmer briefly before fading back into shadow. The scene feels almost dreamlike. Your eyelids grow heavier. The meal from earlier continues providing a pleasant warmth. The blankets have trapped enough heat to create a comfortable pocket around your body. The straw beneath you no longer feels awkward. Gradually, everything begins working together. Outside, temperatures likely continue falling. Inside, your small world becomes more stable. Different diary accounts from northern settlements describe winter nights in surprisingly different ways. Some writers complained endlessly about drafts and discomfort. Others mention the cold only briefly before moving on to other concerns. Perhaps personality influenced perception. Perhaps weather conditions varied dramatically. Most likely both. You imagine those long-ago writers settling beneath their own blankets, listening to their own barns, making their own adjustments against the cold. The experience suddenly feels less distant, more human, more familiar. A horse shifts weight, a chain rattles softly, the sound fades. Minutes pass, your breathing slows. The cold foot problem appears solved at last. Warmth has returned completely. The blanket feels heavier now, though its weight has not changed. Fatigue changes many things, even blankets. The wind outside continues wandering across frozen fields, but it no longer commands your attention. The barn's interior has become your entire universe. Hay, wood, breathing animals, fading lantern light. The simple ingredients of a frontier night. You pull the blanket a final inch higher and settle deeper into the straw. The cold remains present somewhere beyond your little island of warmth, waiting patiently for opportunities. Tonight, however, you have learned a few of the same tricks frontier people relied upon for generations. A little insulation, a little adjustment, a little persistence, and as the barn settles quietly around you, those small victories make the long winter night feel far more manageable than before. At last, genuine drowsiness begins settling over you. The blanket feels warmer. The straw feels softer. Even the distant wind seems less interested in demanding your attention. You close your eyes. A horse breathes nearby. Another shifts weight. The familiar sounds drift through the darkness like slow waves. Sleep edges closer. Then something scurries across the floor. Your eyes open immediately. The sound is brief, light, quick, gone almost as soon as it appears. For several seconds, you remain perfectly still, listening. Nothing follows. The barn settles back into silence, or what passes for silence in a building full of animals. You almost dismiss the interruption. Then the sound returns. Scratch, scratch, pause. A faint rustle emerges from somewhere near the wall. You smile. The mystery is not particularly mysterious. Mice have likely decided to continue their evening activities. The realization feels oddly reassuring. A barn without mice would have been almost suspicious. Stored grain, hay, and shelter naturally attracted small visitors. Where people and animals gathered, smaller creatures often followed. You listen again. Another tiny movement, then stillness. The sounds remain distant enough to be harmless, merely part of the environment. Many frontier farms fought an endless battle against mice. Grain supplies required protection. Feed needed safeguarding. Small rodents possessed a remarkable talent for discovering food no matter how carefully it was stored. The contest rarely ended. It simply continued. Generation after generation, you settle deeper beneath the blanket. The interruption has not disturbed the atmosphere. If anything, it has made the barn feel more alive. A complete ecosystem exists around you. Large animals occupy the stalls, birds rest among the rafters. Tiny creatures explore the shadows. Each has found a place within the structure. Even during winter, the lantern burns lower. Its glow now resembles a small island floating in darkness. Most of the barn remains hidden from view. Only occasional shapes emerge briefly before fading again. The setting feels peaceful, comfortably mysterious. A soft flutter overhead draws your attention upward. You cannot see the source clearly. Perhaps a pigeon adjusting its position. Perhaps a sparrow seeking a more comfortable perch. Many barns hosted birds throughout the year. The high beams provided protection from predators and weather. Small openings allowed easy access during daylight hours. The arrangement benefited both parties. Birds found shelter. Farmers gained assistance with insects. The partnership was practical. Practical partnerships appear frequently throughout frontier life. You hear another faint scratch. This time it sounds closer. Not alarmingly close, just close enough to remind you that the night belongs to more than humans. The thought feels strangely pleasant. Outside, winter stretches across fields and forests. Inside, life continues gathering around warmth, food, and protection. The barn serves all of them. A horse suddenly shakes its head. The resulting noise seems enormous after several minutes of quiet. Leather rattles, hooves shift, straw scatters slightly, then calm returns. You laugh softly to yourself. Nighttime exaggerates everything. Tiny sounds become intriguing. Ordinary sounds become dramatic. Your imagination remains fully employed despite growing fatigue. Some rural families kept cats specifically because of the constant presence of mice around barns and storage buildings. A skilled barn cat could become surprisingly valuable. Stories about talented mousers sometimes spread through communities almost like local legends. The cats themselves rarely seemed impressed. They simply continued working. You glance around the dim interior. No cat appears. At least none that you can see. A cat could be watching from the shadows at this very moment and remain completely invisible. The possibility feels entirely reasonable. Cats specialize in such things. The wind outside has weakened somewhat. Only occasional gusts reach the walls now. Their voices sound softer than before. The barn seems increasingly insulated from the outside world, a separate universe, one governed by slower rhythms. You listen carefully. The mice have gone quiet. The birds remain still. The horses continue breathing steadily. Every creature appears to have settled into its preferred nighttime routine. You feel tempted to do the same, yet curiosity remains awake. A traveller spending a winter night in a barn might encounter more than animals. Rural memoirs occasionally mention unexpected visitors arriving after dark, neighbours seeking shelter, delayed travellers, farmhands returning from late chores. Night did not always guarantee solitude. Still, such arrivals were impossible to predict. The frontier often rewarded flexibility. You imagine hearing footsteps outside the door, a knock, a voice requesting shelter. The scene feels entirely plausible, yet no footsteps come, only wind, only darkness, only the familiar sounds already surrounding you. The imagination enjoys creating possibilities, especially when there is little else to do. A small object falls somewhere overhead, perhaps a bit of straw. The sound lasts less than a second. Then silence returns. Nothing else follows. The barn seems content to offer tiny mysteries without explanations. You decide that is perfectly acceptable. Not every sound requires investigation. Some simply belong to the night. Records preserved from isolated settlements often reveal how closely people observed their surroundings after sunset. Without modern distractions, attention naturally shifted toward weather, animals, and environmental details. People notice sounds that might otherwise have passed completely unnoticed. You understand that perspective now. Every creak has character, every rustle has meaning. Every breath contributes to the atmosphere. The lantern flickers weakly. Its light grows softer, warmer, sleepier. Your own eyelids begin feeling heavier again. The interruption caused by mice and unseen visitors has faded into memory. The sounds no longer seem unusual. They have become part of the barn's identity, part of the ongoing story. You adjust the blanket slightly. Warmth remains trapped beneath it. The straw supports your shoulders comfortably. Nearby horses continue their steady breathing, reliable companions. The sort that ask nothing while offering reassurance simply through presence. Another faint scratch reaches your ears. This time you barely react. The barn has educated you. Small sounds belong here. Tiny visitors belong here. Nighttime movement belongs here. Everything is behaving exactly as it should. You close your eyes once more. The darkness feels softer now, less mysterious, more familiar. Around you, creatures large and small continue their quiet lives beneath the sheltering roof. Horses rest, birds perch, mice explore somewhere. Perhaps an unseen barn cat watches patiently from the shadows. And surrounded by this hidden community of nighttime residents, you drift closer to sleep while the humble barn carries on with its countless small lives unfolding in the darkness. Sleep approaches, then drifts away again. Not because of cold, not because of discomfort, simply because your mind remains awake. The barn has settled into one of those rare nighttime moods that encourages reflection. The sounds have become familiar. The darkness feels safe. The wind outside no longer demands attention. There is nothing urgent to do, nothing to fix, nothing to chase, only time and thoughts. You lie quietly beneath your blanket and stare toward the dim rafters overhead. The lantern burns very low now. Its light barely reaches the beams. Most of the structure exists only as suggestion and shadow. A horse breathes nearby. Another shifts gently. Then stillness returns. The peaceful atmosphere invites memory. Not your own memory at first, other people's, the countless individuals who might have occupied spaces like this before you, travellers, farmhands, neighbours caught by weather, young workers assigned early morning chores, people whose names vanished long ago, yet whose experiences still linger in places like this. You imagine a winter evening many decades earlier. A different traveller settles into the same corner. The same smell of hay fills the air. The same wind brushes the walls. The same horses breathe slowly through the darkness. The details change. The human experience remains surprisingly familiar. That continuity feels comforting. Throughout frontier settlements, evenings often served as opportunities for conversation. Daylight belonged to labour. Darkness offered a brief chance to exchange stories, news, and observations. Long winter nights encouraged talking. There was plenty of time, and very little entertainment competing for attention. You imagine voices filling the barn, not loud voices, quiet ones. The sort people use when others are resting nearby, someone discussing road conditions, someone describing a neighbouring settlement, someone recounting a hunting trip, someone exaggerating slightly for dramatic effect. Human beings have always enjoyed a good story, especially after sunset. The idea feels natural here. The barn almost seems designed for storytelling. The darkness simplifies everything. Without visual distraction, words become more important. Listeners focus more carefully. Imagination supplies the missing details. Perhaps that explains why oral traditions remained so powerful for so long. Stories travelled efficiently. A tale heard in one settlement might appear in another weeks later, carried by travellers moving across the frontier. The details often changed, the core survived. You smile at the thought. Some stories undoubtedly improved during travel. A modest snowfall became a blizzard. A distant wolf became a terrifying beast. A small inconvenience became an epic struggle. Memory occasionally enjoys embellishment. The horses seem unconcerned by this tendency. They continue breathing steadily. You listen for a while. The sounds blend comfortably into the background. A faint creak emerges from somewhere overhead. Then silence. The barn appears to be listening too. Among scattered recollections from rural communities, certain stories appear repeatedly. Strange lights seen across distant fields. Travellers arriving unexpectedly during storms. Animals behaving in unusual ways before dramatic weather changes. Many such stories probably contained perfectly ordinary explanations. Some remain impossible to verify. Their uncertainty helps keep them alive. Mysteries age well. The lantern flickers. Its shrinking flame casts brief shadows across the nearby hay. The movement reminds you of people gathered around a fire listening to tales deep into the night. The comparison feels appropriate. Storytelling and winter seem naturally connected. Perhaps because cold weather encourages gathering. People move closer together. Conversations last longer. Memories become easier to share. You imagine sitting beside a farmer who knows every nearby road and field by heart. He describes landmarks invisible in darkness but familiar beneath daylight. He remembers storms from years ago and neighbours who moved west seeking new opportunities. Each story adds another layer to the landscape. The frontier becomes more than geography. It becomes human experience. A horse snorts softly. The sound brings you back to the present. For a moment you had almost forgotten where you were. The barn remains dark, the blankets remain warm. The night continues. You settle deeper into the straw. Its texture feels familiar now. Earlier it seemed rough and unusual. Hours of exposure have transformed it into something ordinary. Adaptation works quietly, almost invisibly. You notice how your breathing has slowed. The atmosphere encourages it. Everything around you moves at an unhurried pace. Even time feels slower. Some frontier families developed traditions around winter storytelling. Children learned local history through repeated tales. Community events were remembered through anecdotes passed from one generation to another. Practical knowledge often travelled through stories as well. A warning becomes easier to remember when attached to a memorable tale. Humans have always understood that. The wind brushes lightly against the barn. Nothing more, just a soft reminder that winter remains outside. The contrast between exterior and interior feels stronger than ever now. Beyond the walls lies darkness, distance, and cold. Within the barn lies shelter, warmth, and familiar sounds. The difference seems almost symbolic. You understand why travellers valued places like this. Not because they were luxurious, because they provided refuge. Refuge carries enormous value during difficult seasons. Another thought drifts through your mind. How many conversations have these walls overheard? Hundreds, thousands, plans discussed, arguments settled, jokes shared, stories repeated. The barn itself remains silent. Yet it has witnessed countless moments of human life. That realization gives the structure a curious dignity. More than a building, a participant in history. The lantern grows dimmer. The shadows grow deeper. The horses continue resting. You feel sleep drawing closer once again. Not suddenly, gradually, like a slow tide rising along a quiet shore. Your thoughts become less focused. Images drift through your imagination. Snow-covered fields, lantern light. Travellers exchanging stories while winter wind presses against the walls. The scenes blend together gently. No sharp edges remain. Only atmosphere. Only mood. Only the calm rhythm of a frontier night. The barn seems content. The animals seem content. Even your restless thoughts have begun settling, and surrounded by echoes of forgotten conversations, imagined stories, and the quiet companionship of sleeping livestock, you drift a little closer toward dreams, while the long winter night continues unfolding beyond the sheltering walls. The night reaches a peculiar stage. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing changes noticeably. Yet time itself begins behaving differently. You lie beneath your blanket, surrounded by breathing horses and the faint scent of hay, and slowly become aware that the hours are stretching, not literally. Of course, only in the way they feel. The deepest portion of the night often creates this illusion. Minutes seem longer, thoughts wander farther, small sounds attract more attention than they deserve. The world narrows. The clock, if one exists nearby, becomes irrelevant. You measure time differently now. A horse shifts position. Several minutes pass. The wind brushes the wall. Several more minutes pass. The lantern flickers. The darkness deepens. Time moves forward, but gently, almost secretly. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders and settle deeper into the straw. The bedding has moulded itself around your shape over the course of the evening. What felt rough earlier now feels familiar. Comfort grows through acquaintance. The barn remains quiet. The horses seem half asleep. Even the mice have reduced their activities. The entire building feels suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. You understand why these hours often encourage reflection. There is little else competing for attention. A distant creak emerges from somewhere high above. You listen. Nothing follows. The sound disappears into the darkness. For a moment, your imagination considers several possibilities. A shifting beam, a settling pile of hay, a bird adjusting its position. All reasonable explanations. The mystery remains unresolved. You decide that is acceptable. The night does not owe explanations. Your thoughts drift toward the people who spent countless winters in places like this. Some arrived after exhausting journeys. Others finished long days of labour before rolling themselves into blankets near livestock and feed. Many probably experienced these same slow hours, waiting for sleep, listening to the building, thinking. A woman recording farm expenses by lantern light might eventually pause and stare into darkness. A hired hand preparing for dawn chores might listen to the wind while trying unsuccessfully to stay awake. A traveller caught by the weather might wonder how much farther remained until the next settlement. The details changed, the feelings often did not. You shift slightly, the straw rustles beneath you. A nearby horse flicks its tail, then stillness returns. The sounds seem larger than they would during daylight. The darkness grants them importance. A simple movement becomes an event. The experience feels strangely peaceful. One old journal from a northern settlement described winter nights as long enough to contain several moods. Early evening brought conversation. Midnight encouraged reflection. The hours before dawn tested patience. Lying here, you begin understanding that observation. The night possesses stages. You happen to occupy one of the quieter ones. The lantern burns lower. Its light now seems less like illumination and more like companionship. A small glow persists against the darkness, not strong enough to challenge it, strong enough to soften it. You watch the flame for a while. The motion is hypnotic. Tiny movements repeat lasso, Haddo shift across nearby hay. The effect feels almost dreamlike. You blink slowly. Fatigue is beginning to win, yet your mind continues wandering. Somewhere beyond the barn lies an enormous landscape hidden beneath winter darkness. Frozen fields stretch outward. Fences disappear beneath snow. Distant roads wait silently for morning. The thought makes the barn feel smaller and more valuable. Shelter often becomes easier to appreciate when you imagine life without it. The horses seem to understand this instinctively. They remain calm within their stalls, protected from wind and weather. One lowers its head and releases a long breath. The sound drifts through the darkness. Steady, content, you find yourself matching the rhythm unconsciously, breathing slower, thinking less. Another stretch of quiet follows, long enough that you nearly fall asleep. Then a faint bump echoes from somewhere near the far wall. Your eyes open, you listen, nothing. The interruption lasts only seconds, yet it feels strangely significant. This is what the deepest hours do. They transform ordinary noises into temporary mysteries. The mind, lacking new information, becomes wonderfully creative. A stack of hay settles, a horse nudges wood, a mouse explores. Each possibility seems equally plausible. You never discover the answer. The barn keeps its secret. Many recollections from frontier communities describe these middle hours as the longest part of winter nights, without modern entertainment. Distractions were limited. Darkness encouraged patience because there was little alternative. People learned to coexist with waiting. It became a skill, an overlooked one. You adjust the blanket again. Warmth remains trapped beneath it. Your earlier battle with cold drafts feels distant now. The bedding has found its balance. So have you. The wind outside has quieted considerably. Only occasional whispers reach the walls. The absence of noise feels noticeable. Not empty, peaceful. The barn seems to appreciate the calmer weather as much as you do. No boards rattle, no beams complain. Everything rests. Your thoughts become less structured. Images drift through your imagination, snow-covered fields beneath moonlight. Wagons parked beside his distant barns, lanterns glowing through winter darkness. The scenes arrive and disappear without effort, almost like dreams rehearsing before their performance. A horse shifts once more. The familiar sound reassures you immediately. Life continues. The barn remains secure. The night continues moving forward. Even when it feels motionless, that realization brings comfort. You no longer wonder how much time has passed. The question seems unimportant. Morning will arrive eventually. It always does. For now, there is only the present moment. Straw beneath your shoulders, blankets around your body, hay-scented air, gentle animal sounds drifting through darkness, the simple elements of a frontier night. The longest hours are often the quietest. The quietest are often the most memorable, and as the barn settles into a stillness so deep it almost feels sacred. You drift between wakefulness and sleep while winter waits patiently beyond the walls, unable to reach the small world of shelter surrounding you. At some point, Sleep finally arrives. Not all at once, not with dramatic certainty. You simply drift across an invisible boundary and discover that your thoughts have become dreams. For a while, the barn fades away. The horses, the hay, the wind, the lantern. Everything dissolves into the strange logic of sleep. Then a horse moves, your eyes open. The interruption is gentle rather than alarming. A nearby hoof scrapes the floor. Leather shifts against wood. A quiet snort follows. The entire event lasts only seconds. Yet it is enough. You are awake again, at least partially. You stare into the darkness and attempt to determine how much time has passed. The answer remains unavailable. Night offers no useful clues. The lantern has burned even lower. Its flame survives as a tiny glow within the glass. Most of the barn exists beyond sight. Only sound remains reliable. You listen. The horse settles again. Silence returns. You close your eyes. Sleep begins reclaiming territory. Then a different interruption appears. Not a sound, a sensation. Cool air brushes your cheek. The draft is weak, barely noticeable. Yet once discovered, it becomes impossible to ignore. You pull the blanket slightly higher. Problem solved, for now. The frontier night seems determined to remind you that sleep rarely arrives as a single uninterrupted experience. Instead, it comes in fragments, small stretches of rest separated by tiny awakenings. The pattern feels surprisingly natural. Many people sleeping outdoors or in semi-sheltered environments experience similar rhythms. Complete comfort remained uncommon. Adaptation became more important than perfection. You settle deeper into the straw. The bedding feels warmer than earlier. Your body has gradually created a pocket of retained heat. The effect is subtle but welcome. You close your eyes again, dreams return. This time they seem influenced by the barn itself. Hay appears, snow appears, distant lantern light drifts across imagined landscapes. The scenes make little sense, dreams rarely do. A few moments later, or perhaps much longer, another sound draws you back towards the wakefulness. A bird. At least you think it is a bird. Something flutters briefly among the rafters, then stops. The silence that follows feels even deeper than before. You remain motionless, listening. Nothing else happens. The barn returns to stillness. The interruption fades. You drift once more. This cycle repeats itself through much of the night. Sleep arrives, a sound interrupts, awareness returns briefly. Then fatigue pulls you back again. The pattern never feels unpleasant, merely human. A teamster travelling across frontier roads once described winter rest as a series of naps stitched together by the cold weather and unusual noises. The description feels surprisingly accurate tonight. Sleep is happening, just not continuously. You roll slightly onto one side. The straw shifts beneath you. A pleasant warmth greets the spot where your blanket has trapped heat. The sensation feels luxurious compared with the cold darkness beyond your bedding. Comfort is relative. Frontier life demonstrated that lesson repeatedly. Nearby horses continue their own nighttime routines. One stands quietly. Another shifts weight now and then. Their behaviour feels steady and predictable. Predictability becomes reassuring after midnight. The barn itself remains calm. No strong winds strike the walls now. No major noises echo through the structure. Only occasional movements remind you that life continues around you. You find yourself appreciating the animals more with each passing hour, not because they are exciting, because they are dependable. Their presence transforms an empty building into a shared shelter. You close your eyes again. A dream begins almost immediately. This one carries you across a snow-covered field beneath moonlight. The scene feels vivid, crisp, quiet. Then a sudden sneeze from one of the horses sends the entire dream galloping into oblivion. Your eyes open. You stare into darkness. For several seconds you wonder what happened. Then you realize, a horse. Only a horse, nothing more. You laugh softly. the sound disappears into the darkness. Nighttime confusion can be surprisingly entertaining. Certain family recollections from farming communities describe children sleeping in lofts and waking repeatedly because of unfamiliar animal sounds. What seemed alarming during the first night often became ordinary by the third. Human beings adapt quickly when given enough repetition. You're experiencing the same process. Earlier in the evening, every noise demanded investigation. Now most sounds barely register. The barn is teaching you its language. You understand more of it with each passing hour. A distant creak emerges from somewhere near the roof. You ignore it. A horse exhales, you ignore that too, progress. The interruptions continue, but they no longer feel disruptive. Instead, they become part of the experience. Sleep and wakefulness blend together rather than competing. The result feels oddly peaceful. You begin noticing how heavy your blanket has become. Not physically heavier, simply more comforting. The weight creates a sense of security wrapped beneath it. The world seems smaller, manageable, contained. The air remains cool against your face. Every breath reminds you that winter still waits outside, yet the cold no longer feels threatening, only present. Another brief dream arrives. This one vanishes before you can remember it. Then another. Small fragments, images without stories, thoughts without structure. The night drifts onward. Somewhere beyond the walls, stars cross the sky. Snow rests quietly upon fields. The world continues turning toward dawn. Inside the barn, however, time feels slower, measured not by hours but by breaths, by hoof steps, by tiny awakenings between dreams. You adjust your blanket one final time and settle deeper into the warmth beneath it. The straw feels comfortable, the hay smells familiar. The animals sound reassuring. Everything belongs exactly where it should. Sleep approaches again. You offer no resistance. The darkness softens around you. The horses remain nearby, the barn remains steady, and drifting between dreams and brief moments of awareness. You continue your slow journey through the winter night while the quiet rhythms of frontier life carry you gently towards morning. You awaken once more. This time there is no obvious reason. No hoarse sneeze, no fluttering bird, no wandering draft touching your face. Your eyes simply open. For several moments you lie completely still. The darkness feels different, not lighter, not yet, just older somehow. The night has travelled a long distance since sunset. You sense it. The barn senses it too. Everything seems quieter than before. The horses barely move. The wind has almost vanished. Even the occasional creaks from the rafters occur less frequently. The world feels suspended. You stare toward the dim lantern. The flame survives, though only barely. Its tiny glow seems determined to outlast the darkness. The effort feels admirable. A little stubbornness goes a long way on the frontier. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders and listen. Nothing. Then a slow breath from a nearby horse. Then silence again. The stillness encourages thought. Not the wandering dreams of earlier, something more reflective. You find yourself considering the dangers that accompanied winters like this. Not dramatic dangers, the ordinary ones. The sort that occupied people's minds long after exciting stories ended. Cold, distance, isolation, weather. The realities waiting beyond every warm room and sheltered barn. A traveller caught between settlements could quickly learn how valuable shelter truly was. Delayed journey might transform into an overnight stay. A mild snowfall could conceal roads. A broken wagon wheel could become a serious problem once temperatures dropped. The frontier rewarded preparation. It punished carelessness. You glance toward the heavy barn doors. They remain firmly closed. Beyond them lies darkness and frozen ground. Inside lies warmth, at least by comparison. The contrast feels powerful. Many family letters from frontier communities mention weather with remarkable frequency. Modern readers sometimes find the repetition surprising, yet weather influenced nearly everything. Travel plans, crop success, livestock health, daily routines. Winter occupied a particularly important place in those conversations. People respected it. They had good reasons. A horse shifts gently. The sound echoes through the quiet barn. You imagine a blizzard sweeping across the landscape outside, snow filling fence lines, visibility disappearing, wind erasing tracks almost as quickly as they formed. Such storms were not unusual in many regions. Stories about them travelled widely. Some became local legends. Others remained private memories shared only within families. A grandfather recalling a difficult winter. A neighbour remembering livestock lost during severe weather. A traveller describing a night spent searching for shelter. Experiences like those shaped entire communities. You feel grateful for your current situation. The barn may be simple, but it provides exactly what you need. A roof, walls, protection. Sometimes that is enough. The smell of hay remains strong around you. It has become one of the defining features of the night. Every breath carries traces of dry grass stored months earlier, during warmer weather. The connection feels almost poetic. Summer helping winter. Past labour helping present survival. The relationship would not have seemed poetic to most farmers. They probably called it planning. Still, the result remains impressive. You settle deeper into the bedding. The straw beneath you feels familiar now. Every awkward stem has either flattened or been ignored. Your body has accepted the arrangement. Adaptation once again, a phrase that quietly follows frontier life everywhere. A local story from one farming district told of a traveller who ignored repeated warnings about approaching weather and attempted to continue his journey after sunset. By morning, according to the tale, he had returned to the same farm, seeking shelter he could have accepted hours earlier. Whether the story happened exactly as described is impossible to know. The lesson remained clear. Respect conditions. Do not argue with winter. Winter rarely loses. The horse nearest your corner exhales heavily. A cloud of vapour drifts into the darkness. You watch it disappear. The sight reminds you how cold the air truly remains despite all the comforts around you. The barn moderates the season. It does not eliminate it. That distinction matters. You imagine stepping outside right now, snow beneath your boots, sharp air against your face, and the immense darkness stretching across fields. The thought lasts only a moment before you decide remaining inside is the wiser option, a truly difficult decision, at least in theory. The lantern flickers, its flame bends briefly before straightening again. Persistent, like the people who built places such as this. The beams overhead did not appear by accident. Someone cut the timber, someone hauled it, someone raised it into place through labour and determination. You lie beneath the results of that effort, years later. Perhaps decades later, shelter often outlives the hands that created it. There is something comforting about that. The night continues. Slowly, patiently, the deep hours before dawn seem to possess their own personality. Earlier portions of the night contain activity and adjustment. These hours contain endurance. Everything simply continues. The horses continue breathing. The barn continues standing. The winter continues waiting outside. You continue resting. The simplicity feels reassuring. A brief gust brushes the wall. The sound arrives softly, almost politely, then disappears. Nothing follows. The weather appears content to leave the barn alone for now. You appreciate the gesture. Somewhere beyond the fields, another traveller may be awake. Another farm may shelter animals against the cold. Another lantern may glow faintly in another barn. The thought makes the frontier feel less lonely. Vast, certainly, but connected. Human beings have always sought shelter from darkness and weather. The details change across centuries. The instinct remains. Tonight you participate in that long tradition. Blankets, hay, wooden walls, simple solutions to ancient problems. Your eyelids grow heavier again. The reflections begin slowing. Thoughts drift apart, the horses remain calm, the barn remains steady. The darkness remains deep and surrounded by evidence of hard work, careful preparation, and quiet resilience. You settle back into the comforting shelter of the barn while the long winter night carries you patiently toward the first distant hints of dawn. You awaken again. This time the reason becomes clear almost immediately. The air feels colder, not dramatically colder, just enough to notice. You remain tucked beneath your blanket for several moments, unwilling to move more than necessary. The warmth you have collected through the night feels valuable now. Abandoning it seems like poor judgment. The horses appear to agree. None of them seem interested in unnecessary activity. The barn rests in a deep stillness that feels different from earlier hours. The darkness has softened. The wind has weakened. Even the small nighttime sounds seem less frequent. The night has reached its coldest stretch. You can feel it. Winter often saves its sharpest edge for the hours just before dawn. The world cools gradually through the night until temperatures reach their lowest point, shortly before morning begins returning. You experience that reality now. The exposed tip of your nose notices immediately. The blanket receives a slight adjustment. Problem addressed, at least temporarily, Cynthia. You settle deeper into the straw and listen. A horse exhales. Another shifts one hoof. Then quiet returns. The barn almost seems to be holding its breath. You glance toward the fading lantern. The flame remains alive, though only barely. Its glow resembles a tiny star stranded within the darkness. It provides comfort out of proportion to its actual brightness. Sometimes the presence of light matters more than the amount. You watch it for a moment, then return your attention to the cold, not because the temperature is severe, because it is interesting. Every part of the barn responds differently. The air near the floor feels cooler. The protected space beneath your blanket feels warmer. The horses continue creating small pockets of heat around their stalls. The building contains its own weather patterns, tiny climates layered together beneath a single roof. You imagine a farmer waking during these hours to check livestock. The thought alone makes your blanket feel even more precious. Someone had to perform such tasks. Animals required attention regardless of temperature. Water might need inspection. A restless horse might need calming. An unexpected problem could not simply wait until sunrise. Rural life followed practical schedules rather than comfortable ones. You admire that dedication from the safety of your bedding, a very brave form of admiration. The smell of hay remains steady around you. It has become one of the night's constants, through changing temperatures, shifting winds, and drifting sleep. The scent has remained reliable, the familiarity feels reassuring. Your eyes close briefly. You're not fully asleep, not fully awake. Somewhere between. The boundary has become difficult to identify. A faint sound reaches you from outside. Perhaps snow sliding from a roof edge, perhaps a distant branch settling beneath frost. The noise lasts only a moment, then darkness absorbs it completely. The frontier often demanded patience during these final nighttime hours. Morning felt close enough to imagine, yet far enough away to remain frustratingly distant. Waiting became part of the experience. You understand that feeling now. The night seems endless and temporary at the same time, a curious contradiction. The horses continue resting. One lowers its head, another flicks an ear. The movements remain slow and economical, as though even the animals wish to conserve energy until daylight returns. You pull your hands deeper beneath the blanket. Warmth greets them immediately. A small victory, the best kind. The rafters overhead remain hidden in darkness. Earlier in the night they seemed mysterious. Now they feel familiar despite being invisible. You know they are there. That is enough. The same could be said for much of the barn. Hours spent listening have created a mental map more detailed than anything visible in lantern light. You know where the horses stand, you know where the hay rises, you know where the walls creak. The building has introduced itself gradually. A relationship has formed. Outside, winter continues its quiet work across fields and fences. Snow rests upon roofs. Frost gathers where moisture lingers. The landscape waits patiently for light. You wait with it. Another horse breathes deeply. The sound drifts across the darkness. Steady, measured, comforting. You find yourself matching the rhythm again. The simple pattern slows your thoughts. The cold remains present but manageable. Earlier adjustments to your bedding continue paying dividends. The straw beneath you provides insulation. The blanket traps warmth effectively. The protected corner shields you from most drafts. Nothing feels luxurious. Everything feels sufficient. There is a certain satisfaction in that. You think briefly about how many nights people spent solving exactly these kinds of problems. Not grand historical events, not dramatic adventures, simple questions. How do you stay warm? How do you sleep? How do you greet tomorrow with enough energy to work? Much of history unfolded through such ordinary concerns. The realization feels grounding. A horse snorts softly. The sound breaks your train of thought. Then silence returns. The lantern flickers one final time. Its glow shrinks further. Soon dawn will replace it. Not yet, but soon. The knowledge changes the atmosphere slightly. Morning remains invisible. Yet the certainty of its arrival feels tangible. The longest stretch has already passed. You sense it. The night is no longer growing deeper. It is preparing to retreat. You settle comfortably against the haystack and allow your eyes to close once more. The cold lingers around the edges of your sheltered world, but it no longer feels like an opponent, merely a companion, a quiet reminder of the season. The barn remains strong, the horses remain calm, the darkness remains gentle. And during these final cold hours before dawn, you drift peacefully between sleep and wakefulness, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the steady resilience that has carried frontier people through countless winter nights. At first, you are not certain what has changed. You awaken gradually. No loud sound startles you. No sudden movement pulls you from sleep. Instead, awareness returns through a collection of small clues. The darkness feels thinner. The air feels different. The barn itself seems less asleep. You remain still for several moments, listening. A horse shifts in its stall. Another follows. The movements sound purposeful this time, not the casual adjustments of midnight, not the restless motions of animals changing position during sleep. Something else. The first stirrings of a new day. You open your eyes. The lantern has finally surrendered. Its flame is gone. Yet the barn is not completely dark. A faint greyness has appeared. It slips through tiny cracks between the boards. It outlines edges that vanished hours ago. It reveals hints of shapes rather than complete forms. Morning is approaching very slowly. You take a deep breath. The familiar scent of hay remains. The smell feels unchanged, but the atmosphere around it has shifted. The long night seems to be loosening its grip. Outside, dawn remains hidden below the horizon. Inside, the first signs have already arrived. A horse snorts, another stamps a hoof. The sounds seem louder now, perhaps because activity is returning. The animals appear to sense the transition before you fully understand it yourself. Many creatures operate according to rhythms far older than clocks. Light changes, behavior follows, simple, reliable. You push yourself upright. The straw beneath you rustles loudly after so many hours of relative stillness. The movement feels strange. Your muscles remind you that sleeping in a barn differs from sleeping in a proper bed. A little stiffness greets you immediately. Nothing serious, just enough to encourage stretching. You roll your shoulders carefully. The blanket slides downward. Cool air reaches your neck. You quickly decide that perhaps the blanket was not such a bad idea after all. Some lessons require repeated confirmation. The horses continue waking. One lowers its head toward feed, another turns within its stall. The building that seemed frozen in time a few hours earlier now feels increasingly active. The change happens gradually, almost politely. You watch the growing light. Tiny gaps in the walls glow pale silver. The effect transforms the interior. Corners that seemed mysterious during the night become ordinary once again. The rafters reappear. The haystacks regain shape. Tools leaning against walls reveal themselves. The barn begins reclaiming its daytime identity. You realize how much of the night's atmosphere depended on darkness alone. Nothing has physically changed, yet everything feels different. A horse stretches its neck and exhales. The cloud of vapor catches the growing light. For a moment it glows, then disappears. The sight feels beautiful in its simplicity. One reason farm animals often became the first sign of morning was straightforward practicality. Feeding schedules mattered. Daily routines mattered. Livestock expected consistency. The animals did not require alarm clocks. Habit performed the task effectively. You listen as activity spreads through the barn. A rustle here, a hoof step there. The sounds remain gentle, but they are increasing. Life is returning, you find yourself smiling. There is something satisfying about witnessing the world wake up. The process feels ancient, predictable, comforting after a long winter night. Morning almost feels earned. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and glance toward the doors. The cracks surrounding them now glow more clearly. Somewhere beyond those boards, the landscape is emerging from darkness. Snowfields, fences, fields. Perhaps distant trees, everything waits just beyond sight. The anticipation feels pleasant. You remember how intimidating the night seemed when you first entered the barn. Shadows appeared larger, sounds felt mysterious. The frozen world outside seemed endless. Now the darkness is retreating. Confidence returns with the light. The transformation happens every day, yet it never entirely loses its power. A nearby horse nudges wood with its nose. The sound echoes softly through the building. Another animal responds. Soon several are moving, not restlessly, expectantly. The barn has reached that hour when sleep no longer feels quite right. Morning routines are approaching. Even if they have not fully begun, you stretch again. This time the movement feels better. The stiffness fades slightly. The haystack behind you provides familiar support. The straw beneath you has flattened considerably since evening, evidence of a night well spent, or at least successfully survived. A pale shaft of light suddenly appears through a narrow gap high in the wall. You notice it immediately. The beam is faint, barely visible, yet it changes everything. The night is over, not completely, not officially, but effectively. The outcome is no longer in doubt. Birds hidden among the rafters begin stirring as well. A flutter of the wings breaks the quiet. Tiny movements follow overhead. The barn's smallest residents are waking too. The entire structure seems synchronized, as though every creature has received the same message. Morning is coming. You inhale deeply. The air remains cold, perhaps colder than you would prefer, yet it feels fresher now. The promise of daylight changes your relationship with the temperature. Cold before dawn feels temporary, manageable, a challenge with an ending. The sky beyond the walls continues brightening. Grey becomes silver. Silver approaches white. The process remains slow enough to feel relaxing. Nothing rushes, nothing demands urgency. The day arrives at its own pace. You think briefly about all the mornings that must have begun in this barn. Farmers waking before sunrise, workers preparing for chores, travellers gathering belongings before continuing their journeys. The routine repeated countless times, yet every morning carried its own weather, its own tasks, its own possibilities. Today feels no different. The horses continue moving quietly. The birds continue stirring overhead. The darkness continues fading. Wrapped in your blanket and surrounded by the gentle awakening of the barn, you watch the first signs of daylight spread through the building and realize that the long winter night has finally begun giving way to morning. The barn awakens in stages. No bell rings, no announcement is made. Yet every few minutes another sign of morning appears. The horses become more active. Birds flutter among the rafters. Light strengthens along the cracks between the boards. The transformation feels gradual and inevitable. You sit upright and pull the blanket around your shoulders. The warmth trapped inside it has become remarkably persuasive. Leaving that warmth requires commitment. The cold air lingering inside the barn makes a convincing argument for staying exactly where you are for a few moments. You consider the matter seriously. The blanket presents an excellent case. Morning wins anyway. Barely. You stretch carefully. Your back reminds you that hay and straw, while useful, do not quite match a proper mattress. The stiffness is minor, more of a reminder than a complaint. The frontier often expected people to accept small discomforts without much discussion. You imagine many farm workers greeting the day exactly this way. A stretch, a yawn, a brief negotiation with the cold, then movement. The light grows stronger, shapes sharpen. The barn that spent the night as a landscape of shadows now reveals every detail. Harnesses hang neatly from pegs. Tools stand where they were left. Hay rises in golden stacks toward the ceiling. Everything looks ordinary again. Daylight possesses a remarkable talent for reducing mystery. A horse nudges its feed container. Another paws gently at the floor. The sounds carry a new energy. Expectation. The animals know that as breakfast. Water and activity will as soon follow. Routine governs much of life here. You stand carefully. The straw beneath your feet compresses with a soft crunch. Your legs feel slightly unsteady for a moment after so many hours resting in one place. Then balance returns. You're awake now, fully awake. The smell of the barn seems different in daylight, not weaker, simply clearer. Hay remains dominant, but other scents emerge more distinctly. Leather, wood, cold air drifting through tiny openings. The combination feels familiar now, almost comforting. You glance toward the large doors. Thin ribbons of pale morning light outline their edges. Snow reflects brightness from outside, making the cracks glow more intensely than the sky alone would allow. The world beyond the barn is waiting, inside. However, the day begins with chores it usually did. Many people living on farms measured time less by clocks than by tasks. Animals needed feeding regardless of schedules. Water needed carrying. Equipment required maintenance. Weather created additional responsibilities whenever it pleased. The work arrived reliably. You imagine the first person entering the barn after sunrise, perhaps the farmer, perhaps a son or daughter assigned morning duties, perhaps a hired hand beginning another long day. The routine would feel familiar. Doors opened, animals checked, feed distributed, problems identified. The process repeated season after season. A horse turns its head toward you. Its ears flick forward briefly. The animal seems curious, or hopeful, more likely hopeful. Breakfast has a way of focusing attention. You walk slowly through the barn. The floor feels firmer now than it did during the night. Daylight reveals details hidden by darkness. Tracks cross the packed earth. Loose straw lies scattered near stalls. Dust floats lazily through beams of growing light. Everything appears practical. Everything appears used. Nothing feels decorative. The building exists to serve a purpose. That purpose begins again every morning. Overhead, another bird flutters from one beam to another. The movement sends a few pieces of straw drifting downward. They spin gently through the air before landing near the floor. The scene feels peaceful. The day has not fully begun yet. The busiest hours remain ahead. For now, the barn occupies a brief period between rest and labour. You pause beside one stall. The horse inside watches you calmly. Its breath forms faint clouds in the cool air. The animal appears healthy and alert, looking at it. You understand why farmers devoted so much attention to livestock. A strong horse represented mobility, work capacity, and opportunity. A sick horse could create serious problems. A healthy one made countless tasks easier. The relationship between people and animals shaped daily life in ways easy to overlook today. The horse snorts softly. Perhaps it agrees. Perhaps it merely wants breakfast. You suspect the second explanation is more likely. Morning light continues strengthening. The rafters become fully visible. The corners of the barn emerge from shadow. The night has retreated completely now. Only memory remains. You glance toward the spot where you spent the night. The flattened straw clearly marks your temporary bed. The sight feels strangely satisfying. Evidence remains, a small reminder that you occupied this corner through darkness, cold and quiet hours. The arrangement appears surprisingly simple in daylight. That often happens. Challenges seem smaller after they have been overcome. A faint sound reaches the barn from outside, perhaps a distant door opening, perhaps someone crossing snow. Human activity is beginning elsewhere too. The farm is waking. You imagine smoke rising from a chimney, water heating, breakfast preparations beginning inside the farmhouse. Another day taking shape piece by piece. The barn exists within that larger rhythm, always important, rarely glamorous. You walk back toward your sleeping place and gather your belongings. The blanket folds reluctantly, still holding traces of warmth from the night. The simple act feels symbolic. Rest is ending. Work is approaching. A final glance around the interior reveals a completely transformed atmosphere. Hours ago, this building seemed mysterious, shadowed, and almost dreamlike. Now it appears practical, dependable, and thoroughly understandable. Both versions were real. Daylight simply emphasizes different qualities. The horses continue stirring, the birds continue moving overhead, light fills every corner, and as the barn fully awakens around you, the quiet shelter that carried you through the freezing night begins returning to its everyday purpose as the working heart of a frontier farm. With your belongings gathered and the blanket folded, you make your way toward the great barn doors. The building behind you is fully awake now. Horses move within their stalls, birds flutter overhead. Straw rustles beneath hooves. The quiet shelter of the night has become a workplace once again. You pause beside the doors. For a moment, you simply listen. The sounds feel different in daylight, less mysterious, more practical. The same noises that encouraged reflection during darkness now seem connected to tasks waiting to be done. Morning changes perspective. You place a hand against the cold wood. The surface feels rough beneath your fingers. Years of weather have carved small imperfections into every plank. Tiny cracks cross the grain. Smooth areas reveal where countless hands have pushed and pulled these doors through countless seasons. The building carries evidence of use everywhere. Nothing here appears untouched. Nothing feels decorative. Every mark tells a story. So, you push one door open, immediately the morning air rushes inside, cold, clean, bright. The difference feels startling after so many hours indoors. Fresh winter air fills your lungs. For a moment you simply stand there, blinking against the reflected light. Snow covers the landscape. The fields glow beneath a pale sky. Fences emerge from drifts like dark lines drawn across white paper. Every surface seems brighter than it did the previous evening. The world is transformed. Or perhaps daylight simply reveals what darkness concealed. You step outside. Snow crunches beneath your boots. The sound feels wonderfully crisp. The barn behind you releases a faint mixture of warmth and familiar smells. Hay, livestock, leather, and wood drift outward through the open doorway before dissolving into the morning air. The contrast is remarkable. Inside feels lived in. Outside feels vast. You turn and look back at the structure. In daylight. It appears less mysterious than it did at sunset. The shadows have vanished. The shape stands clear against the winter sky. Solid, dependable, patient. The barn does not demand attention. It simply performs its role. Looking closely, you notice details overlooked the previous evening. Snow rests unevenly across the roof. Certain boards appear older than others. Repairs completed years apart have blended into a single structure. The building resembles a record of accumulated effort. One improvement added after another. One season following the next. Near the entrance, the ground has become packed firm from constant traffic. Boots, hooves, wagons, and sleds have crossed the same path repeatedly. The snow cannot remain soft where daily life passes. A narrow trail leads toward the farmhouse. Another disappears toward a smaller outbuilding. The routes reveal habits more clearly than any written description. People move this way because they needed to, every day, every season. You begin walking slowly across the yard. The cold air brushes your face. Sunlight reflects from the snow with surprising intensity. Tiny crystals glitter beneath your boots whenever you disturb the surface. The landscape feels awake now. Smoke rises from the farmhouse chimney. A dog appears briefly near a fence before trotting away. Somewhere beyond sight, a rooster announces information everyone already knows. Morning has arrived. You smile. The announcement seems unnecessary. The sky has handled the matter quite effectively. The farm itself appears modest. Yet it represents an enormous amount of labour. Every fence post required placement. Every building required construction. Every cleared field required effort repeated over many years. Standing here, you begin noticing traces of that work everywhere. A repaired gate, a stack of firewood, a worn pathway, a wagon track partially filled with fresh snow. The landscape resembles a conversation between people and environment. Neither side ever truly wins. Both continue negotiating. You walk a little farther and glance back toward the barn once more. It already feels different. Last night, the structure seemed like an entire world. Every sound mattered. Every shadow carried significance. The building contained your complete experience of the frontier. Now it occupies its proper place within a larger setting, important, but not alone. The farmhouse contributes. The fields contribute. The livestock contribute. The entire farm operates as a connected system. The realization feels satisfying. A flock of small birds suddenly lifts from a nearby fence. Their wings flash against the snow before they disappear into the bright morning sky. The movement lasts only seconds, yet it draws your attention upward. The clouds have thinned considerably since yesterday. Pale blue appears between them. The weather seems calmer now, at least for the moment. Winter remains unpredictable. That uncertainty belongs to its nature. You continue walking slowly. The snow records everything. Hoof prints cross older footprints. Wagon tracks intersect animal trails. The ground preserves a temporary history written during the previous day. Soon new activity will overwrite it. By evening, entirely different marks may appear. The frontier often left its stories in ordinary places, not grand monuments, not dramatic landmarks. A worn path, a repaired beam, a weathered gate, evidence hidden within everyday life. You stop near the edge of the yard and look back one final time. The barn stands quietly beneath the winter sky. Its doors remain open. Morning light spills into the interior. The horses continue their routines. The night shadows have disappeared completely. You realize something interesting. The barn itself has not changed. Only your relationship with it. Yesterday evening, It represented uncertainty and shelter. During the night, it became comfort and companionship. Now it stands as a familiar part of the landscape, a place you understand. The transition feels meaningful. A single night can transform a stranger into a friend, even when that friend happens to be a barn. The cold air feels refreshing rather than harsh now. The daylight encourages movement. The farm is fully awake. The long winter night belongs to memory. And standing beneath the bright morning sky, you take one last appreciative look at the humble structure that carried you safely through darkness before turning your attention toward the day ahead. You remain standing for a moment in the bright winter morning. The snow stretches across the landscape. The barn stands quietly behind you. The farmhouse chimney continues releasing a thin ribbon of smoke into the cold air. Everything appears calm, simple, ordinary. Yet the longer you look, the more you realize that the night has changed the way you see this place. Yesterday evening, the barn was merely a building, a large shape waiting beside a frozen field. You noticed its walls, its roof, its doors, nothing more. Now you notice something entirely different. You notice what it provided: shelter, warmth, company, a place to rest while winter ruled the darkness. The realization feels surprisingly meaningful. The barn itself asks for no recognition. It simply returns to its daily responsibilities. Horses move inside, birds flutter among the rafters, morning chores continue gathering momentum, life moves forward, as it always does. You begin walking slowly along the packed path leading away from the building. Snow crunches softly beneath your boots. The sound accompanies each step. The cold air feels clean and invigorating. Sunlight reflects from every white surface around you. Tiny crystals sparkle like scattered glass across the fields. The landscape appears almost cheerful, a remarkable transformation considering how intimidating it seemed the previous evening. Perspective changes many things. A distant fence line emerges more clearly now. Beyond it lies another field. Beyond that, a cluster of trees. Beyond those trees, perhaps another farm, another barn, another family beginning another winter day. The frontier often appears lonely in stories. Standing here, however, you become aware of connections. Roads link settlements. Neighbours exchanged assistance. Travellers carried news. Communities depended upon one another more than distances sometimes suggest. The paths may have been long, the relationships remained important. You glance back once more. The barn looks smaller now, not because it has changed, because the world around it has expanded. Last night, the structure contained your entire experience. Every sound, every smell, every shadow existed within its walls. Morning has restored the wider landscape. Fields reclaim attention. Sky reclaims attention. Distance reclaims attention. Yet the barn remains central in memory. You continue walking. The packed trail curves gently through the snow. Footprints overlap one another. Some belong to people, others belong to animals. New tracks cross older ones. The ground records movement continuously, a temporary diary written in snow. By afternoon, some marks will soften. By tomorrow, others may disappear completely. Winter preserves and erases at the same time. The thought lingers pleasantly. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. Another answers. Then silence returns. The sounds feel different from those heard during the night. Daylight gives them context, direction, familiarity. Nothing mysterious remains, only ordinary life. Yet ordinary life possesses its own quiet beauty. You slow your pace, there is no hurry. The morning seems content to unfold gradually. The sun climbs a little higher, shadows shorten slightly across the snow. The chill remains, but its sharpest edge has faded. The day promises work. The night offered reflection. Both have their place. You think about the countless winter nights that must have passed through this barn, not as separate stories, not as dramatic events, simply as part of life. Night after night, season after season, a traveller resting beside hay, a farmhand sleeping near the stalls, a child helping with early chores, a family checking livestock during a storm. The details changed. The rhythm endured. The barn witnessed them all. The idea feels comforting. Human lives pass quickly. The routines connecting them often last much longer. You stop near a fence and rest your gloved hands upon the top rail. The wood feels cold, smooth in some places, rough in others, evidence of years spent facing weather, like the barn. The fence carries its history quietly, no speeches, no announcements, only service. The frontier depended upon countless objects like these: gates, buckets, harnesses, sleds, barns, wells, ordinary things performing extraordinary amounts of work. Their importance rarely appeared in grand stories, yet daily life relied upon them completely. The morning light grows warmer, not warm in temperature, warm in colour. Golden tones begin appearing across the snow. The fields seem less silver than before. The entire landscape softens. The transition feels gentle, appropriate. You take a final look across the farm. Smoke rises steadily. Animals move calmly. The barn stands where it always has. Reliable, unassuming, essential. What seemed like a simple overnight shelter now feels like something more. Not because it was luxurious, not because it was remarkable, because it fulfilled its purpose perfectly. Sometimes that is enough. Often it is everything. The memory of the night begins settling into place. The smell of hay, the breathing horses, the creaking beams, the cold air, the fading lantern. The experiences no longer feel immediate. They feel treasured. The way simple moments often become treasured after they pass, you turn your attention toward the wider landscape and toward the day waiting ahead. Yet part of your mind remains in the barn, nestled within straw, listening to horses breathe in the darkness, watching winter press gently against the walls, feeling grateful for shelter. And now, as the bright morning continues spreading across the frontier, you allow those memories to drift softly into the background, becoming part of a larger story carried by fields, fences, snow, and sky. The farm grows quieter in your thoughts. The barn grows smaller in the distance. The cold feels less important. The sunlight feels warmer. Everything softens. The fields stretch outward beneath the pale winter sky. The wind moves gently across the snow. The horses continue their day. The birds continue theirs. The barn remains where it has always been, standing patiently beneath seasons that come and go, offering shelter whenever it is needed. You carry the memory with you, not as an adventure, not as a hardship, simply as a night spent safely within a humble place that understood its purpose. The landscape brightens, the sounds grow softer, the details fade, and with the calm morning settling peacefully over farm, field, and barn, you let the last images drift away like breath in winter air, leaving only quiet, warmth, and rest. Sleep well.